Everybody who is normal in the same way. Everybody who's weird is weird differently. Dana Terrace created The Owl House as a semi-biographical work in the same sense that every series made in history has been a semi-biographical work. She based characters off of ideas of people. Ida Clawthorne was every woman who raised her growing up, who encouraged her to be a little bit weird and ununderstandable. Luce was an amalgamation of herself and the other self-described dorks that she knew growing up. She once got made fun of for an obsession with drawing roadkill, only to later meet other kids who thought that was neat. And King was a little guy who dreamt of being bigger, understandable for anyone who considers themselves the underdog with everything to gain. And then there are the themes themselves, one of finding successes in failures and finding the failures of success. Dana recalled being in her childhood and dreaming of becoming a cartoonist, having spent so much of her young life drawing and watching cartoons. But she was always told that it was a crowded and exclusive field, that she would never get into her dream industry. She did though, getting scouted for animated shorts such as Kickball and Mirage by some of the crew members working on Gravity Falls, where she was given her first proper animation job before moving on to work full-time on DuckTales. Yet, despite working in the exact field she had always dreamed of, there was some creative unfulfillment in that line of work, something that made her crave more creative control. She began conceptualizing the Owl House around this time, combining elements of everything from Hieronymus Bosch's surrealist horror to the cutesy adventurous vibes of the first generation of Pokemon. The initial plan for the show was to include far more horror vibes, though these were shot down and the Owl House wound up as a compromise between the loftier ambitions and the more kid-friendly programming Disney Channel was known for. This isn't to say that these accommodations ruin the aesthetic, though, as Terrace herself claims to have loved being scared as a kid and that there were sure to be many others who appreciated the same thing. This theory was proven when The Owl House finally aired in 2020, becoming the 6th most streamed show in the US for the week it debuted, getting a 100% approval rating from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, and being described by the Christian Broadcasting Network as part of the witch agenda to make witchcraft look positive. This retrospective will hopefully serve to illustrate why the show was and still is so beloved. It will be split into individual episode retrospectives, first recapping the plot of the episode before delving into the themes and connections that episode has to the rest of the series. This way the video will be easier to watch in multiple sittings, as is the intended viewing experience. What is also intended is that this video is not so much watched as it is put on in the background, as the visual elements are largely a slideshow with my voiceover. Anyway, without further delay, let's hide away from the pressures of society while we search for the weird things that make life worth living. A lying witch and a warden. Luz Noceda's repeated behavioral issues convince her school principal as well as her mother to send her to the reality check summer camp to learn to fit in better. But while waiting for the bus to camp, her favorite book, The Good Witch Azura, is stolen by an owl who leads her into a portal to the demon realm. Here she meets Idalyn Clawthorne, a witch who sells human paraphernalia, and quickly intrigues this witch by showing her how to operate some of the human devices. They're interrupted by the Emperor's Guard, who tries to arrest Ida for illegally practicing magic, and as they flee, Ida formally introduces Luz to the Boiling Isles. They then arrive at the Owl House, where she meets Hooty, who is basically the house itself, and King, Ida's roommate who claims he was once a great leader of demons before his crown was stolen by the Warden Wrath, held behind a barrier only a human could cross. In exchange for a return trip home, Ida recruits Luz in retrieving this crown from the Conformatorium, where people who don't fit in with the rest of society are held. Ida serves as a distraction while Luz meets many of the inmates here before they finally find the contraband room, where Luz manages to get King's crown, a cardboard Burger Queen hat. Ida admits that the crown was worthless and that she only wanted it back because it meant something to King before Wrath enters and lops off Ida's head, then asks her out on a date. Ida's okay, stating that limbs coming off is just a side effect of being old, and after reassembling herself, she gives Luz the key back to the human realm before fighting Wrath. But before Luz can leave, she sees the inmates refusing to escape and returns to motivate them to fight. They assist in saving Ida, and Luz is able to quote the good witch Azura before landing the final blow. In the end, Ida offers Luz the portal home one more time, but she turns it down to stay in the demon realm and learn witchcraft under Idolin's guidance. For Luz, the summer camp her mother sent her to was a version of the conformatorium, so when she saw the others trapped in cells for the crime of being different, she saw a potential future she had just managed to avoid. Returning to the human world would have meant going to summer camp, but also returning home with something she hadn't quite made up her mind about for most of the episode. So when she finally achieves this goal, she gets some additional context for what it really meant. Go home, go to camp, stay with Ida, be free to express yourself. And the way in which she really internalizes this lesson is from seeing what their entire quest was about, a worthless paper crown. This is something with no intrinsic value other than a bit of sentimental value to King, and it works as a metaphor for the way that her own creativity and talents have been treated by society. Luz's personality is viewed as a hindrance by those around her, but it has value to her and no one recognizes that. Here, Ida is shown to value the paper crown, not because it's an important item to her, but because it made someone else feel better. Luz doesn't want her personality to be judged by how well she fits in or how useful it is to the world at large, but because it's hers. In the Boiling Isles, she has found potential for people to accept her for who she is because she's found people who accept others regardless of who they are. And since she was being sent away anyway, it doesn't matter if she's at summer camp or hanging out with a witch insofar as her family's concerned. In fact, it's even better because instead of going to a camp where she'll learn to be less like herself, she gets to be even more like the Luz she considers herself to be, her love of witchy things being a guiding force of curiosity in her life. Witches before wizards. Luz finds out that witch training isn't all it's cracked up to be, mostly running potion deliveries across Bonesboro. While running one of these deliveries, she meets a wizard named Adagast, who offers her a quest worthy of a chosen one, with capital letters and everything. Ida and King make fun of her for believing in this sort of thing, though Luz ignores their taunting to set out on her journey. While traveling, she meets a menagerie of companions while traveling through castle towns and the like, receiving various enchanted artifacts for her journey. But Ida starts to suspect that something is wrong. Her fear is confirmed when she visits Adagast Castle and finds evidence he's lying. She travels through these same locations as Luz, finding abandoned villages and decrepit puppets, finally finding Luz being trapped by her own quest rewards as a hostage taken by Adagast, a puppeteer trying to eliminate Ida and thus his competition. Ida exchanges her freedom for Luz's, though Adagast betrays his word and traps Luz in a spell where she lives out her fantasy. But Luz rejects this fantasy to save Ida, fighting off the puppeteer and her old comrades. She feels bad for falling for such a simple trick, but Ida cheers her up by flying her high enough in the sky to view the bones of the Isles from afar. The concept of a chosen one is pervasive through pop culture, significantly so relative to real life, where the idea of a prophesized hero is basically non-existent. Art is meant to reflect real life, and Luz is the type of person to take this seriously. She knows that there are chosen ones, and she dreams of being one, so it's easy for her to fall into a trap about believing that you're somehow special because of a predestined path laid out for you. Unfortunately, there is no predestiny in life, or maybe fortunately so, because as Ida mentions near the end of the episode, the fact that we aren't chosen to do anything means we're allowed to do whatever we want. There's no linear life trajectory for us all, which is a liberating feeling as you don't have to do anything, you get to. Luz has spent so much of her life trying to be a person she is not and can never be, but that's not really so wrong. There's a difference between having a dream and a goal in life. A dream is a distant idea, a concept of what you want to be and how you need to improve yourself to become that thing. A goal, on the other hand, is a more tangible accomplishment, something you can confirmably check off an imaginary box when it's done before moving on to your next one. Luz's mistake isn't that she wants to be more like her idol, Azura, but that she has made it her goal to be like her idol instead of trying to make a more realistic, down-to-earth approach. It's like if a person wanted to be more like a favorite superhero. You wouldn't try rolling around in radioactive waste to be more like them, you would instead embody the personality they have. It's about asking yourself, what would the good witch Azura do, and not, how would the good witch Azura do it? I was a teenage abomination. While skipping a lesson with Ida involving picking apart a beached trash slug, Luz overhears Willow and Amity, two students from the local magic school Hexside, discussing their homework to create an abomination. Willow prefers plant magic and has no talent in making abominations, so Luce volunteers to pretend to be her homework assignment, so she can sneak onto the campus and learn magic. This works, albeit too well, as Luce's acting as an abomination gets Willow the admiration of her professor, but the scorn of Amity, who suspects the girl of cheating to take away her spot as prized pupil. It also attracts the attention of Gus, a human enthusiast who's fascinated by Luce, and Principal Bump, who insists that Willow dissect her abomination to show it off. Not wanting their new friend stabbed, Gus creates a distraction as Luce and Willow run away, with Willow using her plant magic to give Luce an escape. Meanwhile, King and Ida are having a bet over who can be the best teacher between Ida and pupil Luz versus King and a trash slug he found. King uses constant positive reinforcement to teach King Jr. to behave, which only works until he runs out of treats, at which point he and Ida destroy the slug with salt. When Luz arrives trying to warn them of her predicament, Willow and Gus show up saying that everything's fine because Willow's plant magic impressed the principal so much he moved her to a different class. Also, Luz is banned from Hexside, something Ida's proud of her for. This episode is all about different teaching styles competing against one another to see which one is responded to the best. King tries using exclusively positive reinforcement with King Jr., showering his pet/minion with treats but never teaching any level of self-control or self-discipline, which results in a student that didn't really learn all that much but relied on basic survival instinct with no context. The next kind of learning environment is the one that Ida creates, which is independent nearly to a fault. She doesn't care if Luce pays attention or is even present for most of the lessons, which are educational purely incidentally. They go around doing witchy things, and if Luce learns anything, that's a happy little accident. It's not a very effective way of teaching, but it embodies what Ida values most out of her life, her independence. So while it's less likely to teach Luce a valuable skill, it'll still teach her a useful one, skills like how to survive in a hostile world, rather than how to do magic the best. And then the final way of learning is the mainstream version taught at Hexside, one of rote memorization and repetitive busywork. While this is the most traditionally effective way of teaching large groups, it only works best in large groups, where each student has a slightly different need. It's best to cover as many bases as possible even if they aren't covered that well. This is why Ida resents this style of learning. It's not great for individuals with the motivation and drive to learn on their own, as you're stuck with a less effective version of a lesson that's not tailored to your style, waiting for the rest of the class to figure out what you already know, or watching the lesson move on while you're still struggling with the concept. The Intruder. Trapped inside due to a boiling rainstorm, Luce tries to convince Ida to teach her her first spell, light magic. Get it? Because her name is Luce. But Ida's too tired from having placed a barrier over Hooty, and she falls asleep before Luce can get much out of the class, other than the fact that witches have a gland on their hearts they cast from. Looking for an alternative to this gland, Luce and King discover a flask of elixir in Ida's things, though she hears a scream before Luce is able to drink it. They find Hooty maimed, which King suspects is the doing of a demon from his lecture, only for them to find this demon, the Snaggleback, who claims innocence before being grabbed. This monster is soon revealed as Ida herself, and she nearly attacks Luce before being blinded by her phone's camera. Remembering the recorded lecture from earlier, Luce re-watches the video and discovers a strange glyph that appeared on screen. She recreates this glyph to produce a light spell of her own, blinding Ida with it, which incapacitates her long enough to give her the elixir needed to turn back. Ida explains that she was cursed to become an owl demon long ago, and that she needs elixir to remain in her witch form, the reason everyone calls her the Owl Lady. When the Owl House was first being pitched, it was pitched as a show with a far greater amount of horror elements to it, and this episode's a glimpse into what that would have looked like had the original design be kept intact. The concept of boiling rain trapping the characters inside of a house with a monster is straight out of Blake Snyder's book, Save the Cat, about screenwriting structure. Not normally something that one would expect in a kid's show, but this doesn't mean that it can't be included at all, only that it ought to be included with a greater degree of care. Horror doesn't come from gross-outs or adult themes, but from a sensation of being trapped by the unknown, an element of this episode that forces Luce into the desperate situation that eventually causes her to learn light magic, not only dispelling literal darkness, but a metaphorical shadow cast over the episode tonally. Ida's the type of person to isolate herself from the rest of the world due to being the Owl Lady, and up to that point it's assumed this was because she chose a life distant from the rest of the world, one of solitude and the freedom that comes with that solitude. But this episode recontextualizes her decision into less of a decision and more of an affordance. She doesn't live in isolation because she wants to, but because she has to. Although that's not the whole story. Because Ida very much enjoys the freedom that she has in her life, able to do what she wants on her own terms, in spite of the curse on her. It's not like it's all one thing or another. It's more of a mix between the two concepts. She has to live alone, but she's made the most of it. She has to live with a curse, but she's made the most of that too. Her connections to people like Luz and King are valuable to her, proving that she's not antisocial, and she really would reintegrate into society if she had the choice. She just doesn't have the choice, and so she doesn't spend unneeded time imagining what-ifs that can't come to pass. Covention. The Covention is in town, a place where each of the potential witches' covens tries to recruit new members. Ida dislikes the coven system, but Luz is excited to see what is basically a witch job fair. At the Covention, she learns about how covens empower their members with the glyphs, as well as the fact that once you join a coven, you're locked into that school of magic, with the exception of the Emperor's Coven, whose members can learn and practice multiple schools. Amity, still upset about getting in trouble before, argues that Luz is wasting her time, so Luz challenges her to a witch's duel, not realizing this isn't just a thing from the Good Witch Azura. This duel serves as a proxy battle for a fight between Ida and her sister Lilith, who is a member of the Emperor's Coven, arguing that her student is better than Ida's. Luz realizes she is woefully unprepared for a proper duel, so Ida cheats for her with a series of traps set around the arena. One of these traps winds up nearly injuring King when he trips over his convention swag, revealing her deception, but not before it's discovered that Lilith placed an empowering glyph on Amity's neck. Since both students cheated, the duel's called off, but Luz sees Amity pouting over the result, where the two have a frank conversation over the amount of effort they put in. At the end of the episode, Lilith is contacted by Kikamura, Emperor Bellus's assistant, regarding her status on capturing her sister. Ida values independence, and this episode highlights how much that makes her stand out from the rest of the Boiling Isles, as everyone has totally accepted that her methods of living are unconventional. People who practice magic get enhancements for specializing in a specific school, not merely through the glyphs and specialized training, but through social connections to other experts in that field who can assist in guiding others through their learning journey. This independence is, in effect, exchanging the ability to be great at one thing to instead be good at a lot of things, an argument between the idea that experience makes the best teacher versus one that argues that teachers make the best teachers. But the other key way that Ida's independence is highlighted has to do with the fact that it is possible to join a coven and still learn any school of magic you want to, just if you're in the Emperor's Coven. So it's not just that she was rejecting the coven system because it limited her magical abilities, but because it limits her other freedoms instead. She would rather be alone than with the Emperor's kind. But her sister Lilith doesn't see it this way. In fact, she's openly embraced the systems Ida has rejected, though it'll be a while yet before we see her motivations as to why. We do get glimpses of how people can be taken in by these systems, though. Amity wants to be the very best to the point of challenging people who challenge her idea, and is eager to join a high-ranking coven to feed this ambition. Luz, too, dreams of learning a lot of magic and wants the best possible opportunities, and will take whatever's advertised. Hooty's moving hassle. Ida's supplier runs out of elixir, and she has to go to the night market to get more. There she meets Tiblet Tibly Grimhammer III, who insists on being called Tibbles, who offers her more elixir at an exorbitant price. Ida instead offers to play him in a card game for the elixir, but she gets hustled, losing King to the man in the process. Meanwhile, Luz is watching the house alone, where she invites over Willow and Gus without Ida's permission to host a conjuring after being jealous of one Amity and her friends are having. But Luz's magical circle winds up working too well, and they start controlling the house itself instead of the figurine they targeted. They take Hooty for a joyride this way, scaring Amity's friend Boscia before catching the attention of some demon hunters. These hunters capture the house and try to dispose of the kids, only saved by some of Willow's plant magic. After confessing that she pushed Luce and Gus to conjure out of jealousy of her former friend, they confront the hunters and fight their way to safety as they steer Hooty away. As they're riding Hooty around, they crush Tibble's market stand, freeing Ida, who's able to get her elixir in time to reinvigorate her magic, and return home, where she discovers what the others have been up to. But rather than being mad, she's impressed by the magical potential Luce is showing. It's revealed at the end of the episode that Amity's friends barely managed to perform any magic given the position of the moon, but they don't really care as they were more concerned with posting about their attempts online to make others jealous. This had the intended effect, encouraging the trio of Luce, Gus, and Willow to try magic of their own out of jealousy. This is a very normal episode if you ignore the setting that surrounds it. A child trying to sneak a party by their parental figure while they're out, hosted mostly to make another group of girls jealous. Then it gets out of hand as they try to make everything go back to normal before Mom gets home. This is the kind of plot that you don't have to travel to the Boiling Isles to find. It's a staple of tween comedies and sitcoms that's been around for as long as the genre itself, but that's the point. Because it doesn't matter if a person is a witch or a human, they're still going to act according to a few very basic social niceties. Kids get jealous of each other, they try to put others down to feel good about themselves, people feel guilty about things, they ignore the guilt to fit in. We're all just very regular. And this is a staple of what makes the Owl House a memorable show. As alien and mystical as the setting itself is, the characters still behave like anyone in the audience would, meaning that we have something relatable to ground us to the higher concept magic system and the like. To really explore the world of a series, there has to be a baseline to start from, and making that baseline into the characters is a tried and true way to make the audience care about the world these characters are in. Lost in language. Ida and King are given a basket with a bat baby inside and a note from the wealthy Bat Queen saying they'll be rewarded if they watch after it. Not wanting to be caught up in all the noise, Luce heads out to return some of Ida's overdue library books. While there, she sees the Blight family with Amity reading books to kids as her older twin siblings, Amira and Edric, convince Luce to cause some trouble around the library. Luce goes along with them, not realizing their real personalities, until they convince her to break in after hours during the Wailing Star, where the characters in the books come to life, and they convince her to vandalize some of the pages. They also show Luce Amity's secret hideaway and ask her to search for the girl's diary, though Amity catches Luce in the act and storms off. When Luce tries to apologize, they're captured by the vandalized character from Amity's book, who tries sewing them into the pages of a book as he collects friends. But working together, the girls are able to break free after Amity draws an eraser, allowing Luce to undo her vandalism and bring the rabbit back to normal. Luce gives Amity a copy of the next volume of Azura to apologize, and they head their separate ways, with Luce returning to find an exhausted Ida and King cuddling with the babies, now plural, before the Bat Queen rewards them with a chest of gold and a whistle. It's an admirable trait for Luce to try to find the best in everyone she meets, and by the end of the episode, she's rewarded for this optimism in people as her ongoing feud with Amity turns them from enemies into rivals, a relationship that will continue to change over the course of the series. But it's not all great for her as seen in the beginning of the episode, as she's being led around by characters like the twins. She wants to see the good in people so badly that she's able to be manipulated by people who are merely pretending to be good when they really have ulterior motives. This isn't the first time this has happened to Luce, and there's an implication that it won't be the last time she's taken in by a charismatic stranger, all because she saw the best in them. Because it's not a behavior that the narrative ever really condemns her for having. Luce acts with kindness to people and tries to find something good in them wherever she can, and more often than not, she succeeds in finding this goodness, which the other person responds to by showing even more of the positive traits. Amity is rude and abrasive to others, which causes her to be shut off from the rest of the world, save for those others who are abrasive as well, a friend circle that has more interest in excluding others than actually enjoying one another's company. But Luce powers through this cold outer shell and finds a warm human inside, and this really is the point of this series and Luce's character by extension. It's not about being weird versus being normal, but being unique and finding value in that. So some people are nice but dishonest, whereas others are rude but deep down they're nicer. And allowing the people around you to be authentically better people is always worth the occasional burn, even getting burned by the same people a few times before they finally trust you. Once Upon a Swap. Luce tries to spice up the display at Ida's stand, though Ida shuts this down as she is trying to lay low, all while King is upset at being pampered. So to stop everyone from complaining, Ida offers to swap their bodies with one another so they can get a bit of empathy. Ida inhabits King's body, enjoying the free stuff people give her, as well as the fact that she can flaunt around guards without being arrested. And then two old women who run a cat cafe grab her and plan on pampering the pet creature until it becomes brain-dead independent. King inhabits Luce's body and runs off to go take over the world, or at least impress a bunch of teenagers. But after causing some mischief, one of Amity's friends gets jealous and challenges her to a dangerous race. King is able to catch up, but eventually crashes, landing by chance near Ida at the cat cafe, where he's also kidnapped by the woman running the business who plan to deprogram King's teenage mind. Luce inhabits Ida's body, taking a while to get a hang of her magical abilities before quickly selling out of a lot of enchanted goods. But this catches the attention of the Coven soldiers, who arrest Luce as she tries to explain she isn't actually Ida. But before she can be sentenced, Lilith takes over the investigation and offers who she believes is her sister the opportunity to join the Emperor's Coven, as she used to want to do. Before she's able to process this bit of Ida's history, Luce accidentally breaks free with a magical blast and runs away before finding the others, and everyone swaps back. Ida, now in her body, uses her magic to mass swap all the various groups chasing after the trio before escaping home. One of the best ways to describe what a character is to describe what they are not like. An easy way of doing this is to put someone else in their shoes, or in this case, their body, for a little bit to see what changes. Each of the three main characters considers their problems in life to be things intrinsic to themselves, things they have little control over. Luce wishes she was more naturally gifted at magic instead of having to work so hard like she does. King believes that his stature makes his dreams of domination difficult. And Ida thinks that she's held back by things like her cursed and criminal status. So swapping bodies means swapping problems, and everyone's fine with this as they consider problems other than their own not to be so bad. Of course, this is only because people tend to keep anxieties to themselves. Neither King nor Luce really knows the full extent to which Ida's life has been affected by the curse, so they only see a few plus sides to being her. King's real anxieties about his past are frequently downplayed or dismissed as comic relief, and the real danger that comes with his vulnerability is something that others don't see. And Luce has conflated her lack of intrinsic magical abilities with a failure as a person for not fitting in, so what others consider a skill issue is to her a moral failing. We think about our own problems far more frequently than we think about the problems of other people, and while this makes the anxieties these problems create far harsher, it also makes our familiarity with these problems far greater. Meaning that no one can fix your issues in life quite as well as the person most qualified and experienced to fix them, yourself. Something ventured, someone framed. Gus is worried about losing his position as president of the Human Appreciation Society to Bartholomew, a new student showing off fake human artifacts. So he brings in Luce as a human expert, lying to her about her ban being lifted. But when Luce is about to call out Bartholomew as a liar, he confesses that he made things up to sound cool because he was nervous that he wouldn't fit in. Gus is sympathetic to this desire as he skipped a few grades and feels self-conscious about being younger than everyone. Then he gets betrayed as Bartholomew turns them all in, and Luce is taken to detention. Gus follows her by pulling a fire alarm, getting himself and Matt taken to detention as well, where they see that the detention hall has students held in captivity and brainwashed into compliance. Gus admits he lied to Luce and makes things right by rescuing everyone, even Bartholomew, by using human tools. Seeing how excited Luce was to go back to school, Ida decides to talk to Principal Bump to get her unbanned, something he only agrees to do if she cleans up the messes she left behind when she was a student. Ida succeeds and Bump lifts the ban just as Gus and the others destroy the detention hall, though Gus takes the blame for this, and instead of Luce being banned again, he's merely stripped of his title as president of the Human Appreciation Society. The first episode focusing primarily on Gus, revealing a bit more about him aside from the fact that he is really into humans. For one, his human obsession comes as less of a random affinity for a random subject, but instead it's for essentially the same reasons Luce fell into her own world of escapism. He's smart enough to have skipped a few grades, making him younger than his peers. Being younger then makes him stand out, and not in a good way, and this results in a self-conscious obsession with any form of escapism he can find. While a human living in the human world might turn to the supernatural to fantasize about, someone in a supernatural setting would obsess over the mundane. It is a cute inversion of what one would normally expect, but one that fits in because it uses the same framing we're familiar with. Again, this is essentially what the show is about in these early slice-of-life seasons, relatable stories from an unrelatable world. Meanwhile, Luce is excited to finally be allowed to enroll in Hexside the following semester, in spite of this going completely contradictory to the lessons Ida's trying to teach, at least the lessons that she starts out teaching. Because for all the value she places on self-paced independent learning, it would be very hypocritical were she to forbid a student from learning at the place they wanted to. If Luce wants to attend a magic school, she should be able to make that decision herself. To truly value independence means allowing people the choice to conform, and trusting that they have the ability to figure out when and when not to blend in. Escape of the Palismen. Ida's curse is getting worse, with the elixir she's been taking no longer enough to keep it in check. She transforms into her owl beast form, which King decides to use for his own gain after feuding with a child at the park. But the demon hunters from before, now animal control, capture the rampaging Ida, so King has to screech adorably to remind her of her humanity. Meanwhile, Luce has recently learned about Palismen like Owlbert, who are basically a cross between a familiar and a staff. She decides to fly herself and her friends to a grudge-bee match, only to crash, hurting Owlbert. He flees into the woods and is found by the Bat Queen, who refuses to release the Palismen until Luce can prove she cares with a series of trials. In spite of clearing these trials, the Bat Queen still refuses, until Luce notices a notch on her foot, implying she was once a Palismen before, only to be abandoned by her master. Luce discovers all the other animals she's taken in are also abandoned Palismen, and she apologizes to Owlbert, who finally chooses to return home. It's assumed that Owlbert is just an object, an extension of Ida's staff that doesn't really have a mind of its own, even if it does act a little bit like an animal, and to an extent this is still true. Palismen are basically property of the witches who control them, but this shouldn't have a heavy influence on the way they're treated regardless. It's said that the mark of a person's character is how they treat those who can't do anything for them, like seeing a person treat you differently than they treat waitstaff and realizing they're only nice because they want something. Luce assumed Owlbert was an inanimate object, and so taking the staff/Palismen is a matter of asking Ida if it's alright, not asking Owlbert himself. Part of being in a new world means learning new rules, and some of these rules are about treating people with respect who you didn't even know existed before. Does Luce make a mistake in this episode? Yes. But as soon as she figures out someone was harmed, she tries to fix it. And of course, the villain of this episode is just someone who was never afforded that same kindness. The Bat Queen was abandoned at some point in the past, and while the truth behind her history is something that never gets confirmed due to the third season being cut short, the fact that Luce's reaction to learning her backstory is to offer help shows that she's never stopped viewing everyone, even villains, as deserving of care. She just never thought to offer it until that point because she didn't know she could. Sense and Insensitivity. Luce and King enter a writing competition together, though they disagree on the tone of the work they're making. Luce at first writes a sappy romance story starring a self-insert, only for King to rewrite her story into a violent one, starring his own self-insert. King's story is scouted by a publisher named Penier, who offers him fame and fortune in exchange for the publishing rights to this novel titled Ruler's Reach. Luce is torn between wanting to support her friend and ignoring him due to the betrayal, but this doesn't matter when Penier overhears the two discussing how King can't write well without rebelling against her outline. He kidnaps them both, placing the authors into a box that will crush them if they don't deliver. Luce and the King finally make their peace, working together to blind Penier before the day is actually saved by a different self-insert pushing her own, much better story. Meanwhile, Ida spies on Lilith as she pursues the Flower of Eternal Youth with the aid of a bookseller. Ida gets her own map and follows her sister, even rescuing her before rushing ahead, where it's revealed the flower never existed and was a trap set by the salesman, though he's predictably overwhelmed due to picking a fight with a member of the Emperor's Coven and her sister. In the end, Lilith offers an invitation to the Emperor's Coven to her sister as a means of curing her curse, though Ida refuses, hoping to cure herself on her own. Luce and King both go into their collaboration with different goals in mind, Luce hoping to create a story out of a sense of passion as she enjoys writing for the sake of art. King hopes to become famous for his work with far less interest in what his stories are actually about compared to how well they sell. And King gets what he wants out of his writing, but rather than having to compromise his artistic integrity, he instead sacrifices moral integrity. But rather than having some crisis at the high cost of his success, he instead panics over the fact that he can only betray Luce one time, and that continued success has to come from somewhere else. This means that his crisis had less to do with betraying his friend and taking credit for her work than it had to do with the fact that his eternal glory was temporary. Basically, he betrayed a friend and got less for it than he wanted. Ironically enough, the betrayal itself is what made his first novel worth reading. King was only able to make a good story under the restrictions of rebelling against Luce's ideas. When he had free reign to write whatever he wanted to, he failed to make something worth reading. Sometimes restrictions on a person's ability to write force them to be creative. A great such example is the Owl House itself, toning down some of the darker themes in order to focus on characterization over world building. Other times, like the not-so-subtle crunch time metaphor, they stifle a person's creativity as they care far more about being done than being good. Adventures in the Elements. Luce learns that she has to know at least 2 spells to enroll in Hexside, and not wanting to embarrass herself in front of the Blights by admitting she doesn't, she asks Ida for help in training in secret. This secret training takes place on the knee of the Boiling Isles, where Amity and her siblings are already practicing a fire spell with the pre-charged wand. Jealous that her friend is performing real magic while Ida has her tasting rocks and the like, Luce borrows the magic wand and manages to cast a few fireballs, one of which strikes and angers the Slither Beast, who kidnaps Edric, Amira, and Ida. Amity heads out to rescue them, trapping Luce in a magical cage so she won't hurt herself during a real battle, then giving Luce plenty of time to actually ponder nature as Ida was trying to get her to do. Here she finds a glyph on a snowflake that she copies to produce ice magic, her second spell. She catches up to Amity, and the two use the newfound skill to distract the beast long enough for Amity to break the others free, with Ida casting a sleep spell that allows them to get home safely. Back at the Owl House, King is hoping to host a boot camp by animating some of his stuffed animals with Ida's cooking magic, though these stuffed animals turn on him for making them do busy work, and he has to beg for Hooty's help in destroying them. The concept of wild magic has been brought up once or twice before, but always in the context of its comparisons to more traditional schools of thought. Here it's finally given a more concrete context as magic from the wild, rather than the fact that it's untamed by social convention. So magic is not something inherent to witches, but rather is something that comes from the universe itself, merely controlled after the fact by them. So the idea of humans being incapable of casting magic is a myth if they were able to do it this way all along. In the moment, this is viewed as a revelation as to how Luce is able to discover and then use glyphs in order to control the elements around her. But far deeper than that, it asks the question of why no one thought to do this before. The answer is suggested in the alternative ways of learning magic explained in this episode, notably the training wand that Amity uses as she learns to master fire. Luce is scolded for using this because it distracts from where real magic comes from. It's not her getting good at controlling magic, merely redirecting it. The schools that Ida dislikes so much have a similar problem, as they're so hyper-focused on a single school of magic to the point of restricting students who want to learn more, that it prevents them from figuring out that magic's all around them, taking the real, literal application of learning and turning it into controlled exercises with no context. The first day. Ida drops off Luce on her first day of school, where she tries and fails to make a good impression of Principal Bump before being placed semi-randomly into the potions track. She struggles here, largely because she is more interested in watching the other students getting in trouble and placed into the detention track, where she won't get in the way of one of the Emperor's inspectors visiting that day. Willow and Gus see her in detention, and Luce asks for help getting out because she thinks she doesn't belong in there, until the other detention students reward her for taking the blame for talking by showing off the Room of Shortcuts, something they use to get to anywhere in the school they want to so they can study multiple fields, the thing that got them sent to detention in the first place. The Emperor's inspector arrives for a showing of the students' magical powers, only to transform into a basilisk who starts to consume their magic itself, leaving the students and faculty weakened. This basilisk drains the magic from everyone but Luce and the other detention students, who work together to take out the monster using their multiple magic tracks work of knowledge. After being saved, the principal prepares to expel the students before realizing that he was wrong about their abilities, allowing Hexside students to study multiple schools, just like another notorious troublemaker from the past, Ida. Thus far, the people who we've really seen rebelling against the systems of magic on the Boiling Isles have been scarce and usually in some sort of confinement. But here we see an instance of people who are on the inside, and yet still able to learn what they want to by circumventing the rules. The kids in detention for daring to question Hexside are content with their position, as they found ways around the limitations that would not otherwise exist had they observed more of the rules. This is the very thing that Ida was concerned with, that Luce may wind up being boxed in by the limitations of Hexside, and her concerns have now been alleviated with the same room of shortcuts Ida herself made. Whether or not Luce realizes it, she is following in her teacher's footsteps, even while her teacher's not there to leave them. This episode intentionally draws as many comparisons as possible to other well-known wizard school media, borrowing some of the same language used to describe the tropes present there to not only serve as a source of parody, but to ground the audience's expectations of what they're going to see. This is a more efficient way of storytelling, allowing common cultural knowledge to fill in gaps to allow the writers to go straight into the distinctions of the setting, as whatever's not mentioned is assumed. The way the Owl House develops its setting borrows as much from fiction as it does from reality, allowing it to iterate on existing ideas. Really small problems. Luce and King head to the carnival to spend some quality time together, hoping to win a friendship necklace from the prize pool. But when Luce meets Gus and Willow there, they start exploring the carnival together, leaving King behind as he can't keep up with their pace. He meets with a poorly disguised Tibbles, who was showing off his tiny zoo, and is offered a potion that will temporarily make the others disappear. But the real purpose of this potion is to shrink things, something King doesn't realize until after spending one-on-one time with Luce, before the tiny duo catches up to them in the Hall of Mirrors. All four are then shrunk down and kidnapped by Tibbles, who plans on feeding them to his tiny zoo as a part of a show. But King's able to escape, using the friendship necklace he and Luce won to reverse the spell, including the spell cast on the zoo animals, who begin rampaging around until Ida, currently selling candy apples as punishment for running scams at the carnival without permission, redirects their attention back to Tibbles. In the end, the necklace is destroyed, but King gives each of the four of them a piece of it, accepting that he has to share Luce's time. King laments that Luce will one day return to the human world, and when she does, he'll never see her again. This is why he's so intent on spending as much time as possible with her, to the point of being controlling over her companionship and not wanting to share it with others. But while King's time with Luce is limited, her time with everyone else is limited as well. Eventually, she'll leave not only him, but the Boiling Isles, so she has to enjoy as much of her time as possible instead of just a small part. King's jealousy was self-centered, and he didn't realize that others were only staving off the inevitable too. But this made it easier for him to empathize with Willow and Gus, because that limited time he had left applied to them as well. It helps that Luce wasn't trying to blow him off or anything either. She recruited her other friends to assist in winning King a prize. They just moved a bit faster than he could. Once more, every antagonist in this episode has some justification for their actions, meaning they're implied not to really be villains, but people who overreacted to being mistreated. Tibbles wants revenge for his market stand being destroyed, but even before then he was a con artist. Then again, so is Ida, so it's not like we can really hate someone for being like her. The fun police feuding with Ida likewise call themselves con men who take their jobs very seriously. And of course the main instigator of this episode's conflict is King himself, who's just fearful he's about to lose his friend and is able to be manipulated by a character weakness that's formed out of love. Understanding Willow. Luce and Willow are in a memory photo class where they're able to extract photographs of memories to view them. But when a picture of Amity and Willow together is nearly seen by Amity's friends, she lights it on fire, which spreads to the other photos, severely damaging Willow's memories as harming the photograph erases the memory itself. Luce and Amity have Ida transport them inside of Willow's mind so they can work on repairing these memories, though Amity keeps trying to direct Luce's attention away from a specific memory of the two of them together. She keeps this up until a flaming monster is discovered to be re-destroying every memory of Amity in Willow's mind, revealed after Luce splashes it with water to be the inner Willow, trying to erase Amity entirely. Her reason for this is revealed in that final memory. Amity refused to be Willow's friend due to her being a late bloomer magically, although Amity corrects her by saying the real reason was that Amity's parents, the Blights, threatened to use their connections to stop Willow from enrolling in Hexside if she continued spending time around their daughter. Now knowing the truth, the inner Willow cools off and helps them to repair the last few memories before they exit together. Meanwhile, Gus is trying to decide on a famous person to interview for class, stuck between Ida and King, who try to win him over, only to instead decide to interview Hooty. I've already written before on how the Owl House uses the language of media to establish ideas using shorthand in order to make certain aspects of the show easier to understand at a glance, and this episode is the culmination of one of the advantages to doing this. In Amity's first appearance, the audience is given the impression that she's the typical popular girl archetype, one who uses her prestige to bully others who she thinks of as lesser. This is a character trope we see a lot of in other works, and is one that most audience members will immediately fill in the gaps on. Because the audience assumes they know her, though, we can later have our expectations subverted without the writers actually having to lie about her or make it appear as though she was so weak-willed as to flip personality suddenly. Amity was only acting the role of the mean girl because of the pressure from her parents and the people around her. She has the Blight family name to uphold, something she doesn't really do voluntarily, and a lot of her actions are informed by this pressure she feels from her parents and siblings. Her actions, but not her thoughts. By the end of this episode, Willow has her memories back, but this doesn't mean she's immediately going to be best friends with Amity, who leaves while Luce is still celebrating. It would be unrealistic for a person who harmed you, even unwillingly, to instantly be forgiven, and she knows that she has to make good on her promise to prevent her friends from teasing Willow in the future. Something that only takes about 2 episodes to do, but I digress. Enchanting Grom fight. Hexside is having its annual Grom night, with the students dressing up and asking one another out. Luce is excited about this, especially when Amity is announced ahead of time to be the Grom Queen, only for this to be revealed as a responsibility people don't want, due to the Grom King/Queen having to fight Grometheus the Fearbringer, a monster who lives under the school, capable of shapeshifting into the fighter's greatest fear. As Amity does not want her fear revealed, Luce offers to take the responsibility from her, in spite of being unprepared. She practices fighting against a manifestation of Ida, saying she's not good enough for the position, but doesn't make much progress before Grom begins. At Grom Night, King and Gus are emceeing the fight, though King gets stage fright from speaking in front of a bunch of teenagers. Luce begins the fight, only for the Grom to shapeshift into her actual greatest fear, her mother discovering she was lying about going to camp. Luce runs away from the Grom, which chases her to a clearing as Ida follows, preparing to bail out her student. But it's Amity who takes over the fight, stepping in the way of the Grom, who shapeshifts into a humanoid form before taking a promposal note from Amity's pocket and tearing it up. Luce sees this half-note and offers to take Amity to prom as her fear was rejection. Amity accepts, and the two dance together to defeat the Grom with their combined abilities, including plant magic that Luce has just learned. It's revealed, though only to the audience, that the other half of the note contained Luce's name as the two girls return to school alongside King, who has overcome his stage fright by pandering. Once home, Luce is finally able to give proper responses to her mother's text, before it's revealed someone has been sending letters to her mom impersonating her daughter. Amity's greatest fear is revealed as rejection, and while it's implied that it's a rejection from Luce specifically that she's afraid of, the fact is that it's more of a generalized rejection that she doesn't want to risk facing. Luce's fear manifested as her mother, but Amity's was an amorphous blob, so it's not that she's afraid of Luce not liking her, but anyone not liking her in general. This tracks with her character thus far. In fact, it tracks with both her and Luce's motivations. Because Luce basically ran away from home due to not being accepted there, fleeing people who don't respect her life choices and looking elsewhere. Amity has done the opposite. Rather than abandoning people who don't care for her, she instead latches onto them, changing herself to better be accepted. Luce refuses to change and is considered an outsider as a result, while Amity accepts change and fits in, even though it makes her unhappy. But Amity learns not to change from this episode, not only because she has found someone who accepts her for who she is, but because she found someone who accepts who she could become. Amity was not the nicest person when she first met Luce, but Luce accepted her nonetheless, and she slowly came out of her shell to validate that level of acceptance. Luce's fear, on the other hand, was less about what she was going to do and more about a return to the past. The fact that her running away from home in the first episode would eventually have consequences, and that by continuing to obsess over prom or witchcraft or whatever was only delaying the inevitable return to a life where she was just weird. It's not just that Luce is afraid of her mother learning the truth, but that her mother learning the truth is a symptom of a much greater fear, the return to the way things used to be. Wing it like witches. Boscha, the new popular girl of Amity's former group, is jealous of Willow for becoming popular, taking attention away from her Grudgeby success as team captain. She tries insulting Willow to bring down her confidence, but this only makes Luce upset as she defends her friend, eventually getting an idea from Amity to challenge her to a Grudgeby match to dethrone her position. Luce is convinced that she can whip Gus and Willow into shape with the help of a montage, but winds up injuring them by pushing too hard. Amity explains that she used to be the Grudgeby team captain in the past, but also injured her teammates reenacting a move from the Good Witch Azura, which caused her to reevaluate her choices and quit. Hearing this story, Luce decides to forfeit the game as Willow didn't really want to play in the first place. But when Boscha and her teammates start using Luce as a training dummy, Amity warns the others, prompting Willow and Amity to stand up for their friend. They challenge the others to a proper match this time, using their teamwork and sportsmanship to win, or so it seems, as Boscha caught the the rusty smidge, which results in an automatic victory. But rather than being able to harass the losing team, Boscha's teammates instead congratulate the others on a match well done, even inviting her onto their team. But Willow turns this position down and Luce carries an injured Amity back to the Owl House, where Lilith and Ida are having a one-on-one in Grudgeby to determine if Ida will go to the Emperor. We've seen in episodes past that Luce is the type to believe in pop culture versions of the world rather than reality, and while in some cases this means that she has a more optimistic view of the world than others do, in others it means that she is detached enough from reality she can cause harm. Here she's eager to believe in the 80s-style montage of sports stories, where a group of scrappy misfits can overcome a more practiced team with nothing but a training montage, when the reality is that they're just going to hurt themselves if they push their group hard enough to make that a reality. It's unrealistic to improve that quickly in such a short amount of time, and trying to force that level of improvement will only burn out the entire team. So it seems like Luce's dream version of events winds up hurting Willow in an attempt not so much to make Willow more self-confident, but to make her own dreams come true for her own sake. At least, this is how her actions are interpreted by Willow and the others after she does them. Her friends drop out of the match when they suspect that Luce is pushing them too hard for personal reasons. If they were all as passionate as she was about Grudgeby, then there wouldn't have been a problem with a harsh practice session or two. It isn't until Luce is prepared to take the punishment arranged by the Hexside team that they realize the truth. Sure, Luce was enthusiastic about the sport, but that doesn't contradict her motives insofar as she wanted to help her friends. She can do both, and it's not an issue that she does both. She can care about those around her and have fun at the same time. In the end, she does hurt Amity by copying one of Azura's techniques, but this isn't treated like a negative action because Amity knew what she was signing up for and everyone agreed to the risk, unlike when Willow and Gus were volunteered to play for Willow's popularity. Agony of a Witch. Hexside is going on a field trip to the Emperor's Palace, something Luce is unsure about going on until hearing of the various artifacts he has, including the healing hat that could cure Ida's curse, which is nearing a breaking point. Lilith has recently failed in an attempt at capturing Ida, unable to get past Hooty, and she's on her way to speak with Emperor Belos, which catches Luce's attention, causing her to sneak away from the tour group to see the man for herself. Belos uses some sort of eye drop to cure an affliction before scolding Lilith for her failure, giving her a final chance. Luce sneaks away to find the healing hat, joined by Willow and Gus, who have their own curiosity about certain artifacts, where they enter the museum where it's held. But once they take these items, Belos himself speaks to them about their theft before Lilith enters the room with a scheme to kidnap Luce to get to her sister. Willow and Gus are sent to warn Ida, who rushes into Lilith's trap knowingly to save her apprentice. She doesn't allow Lilith to say much, going straight into combat, but her curse is slowing her down significantly enough that it causes Lilith to confess that she was the one who cursed her sister all those years ago, due to being jealous over her abilities. Lilith manages to win the fight by using Luce as a human shield, forcing Ida to use the last of her magic and allowing the curse to fully take over, making her easy to capture. Young blood, old souls. Luce returns to the Owl House, getting the witch's cloak Ida made for her and recruiting King to assist in rescuing her teacher. She hears that Idolin is due to be petrified at sundown and breaks the law in front of Warden Wrath to enter the Conformatorium to be closer. But when she finds and fails to rescue Ida, her former mentor tries to convince Luce to take the door back to the human realm. But Lilith comes in, with Luce attacking her for the betrayal of her sister, knocking her into the door. Once inside the human world, Luce's magic ceases to work and Lilith finally apologizes, telling the entire truth. She and Ida used to be close until it was time to choose a coven. Both girls wanted to be in the Emperor's Coven, but there was only room for one, so Lilith planned on temporarily cursing Ida to win the duel that they would have had to fight to decide who got the position, only for Ida to refuse to fight anyway, giving up the position to her sister. The curse wound up being far more dangerous than Lilith had anticipated, so she made it her goal to get Ida to join the Emperor's Coven to cure her. But as the Emperor revealed he never intended to cure her, Lilith plans to betray him alongside Luce if they return to the demon realm. They go back through the door, with Luce turning down a chance to see her mother again, only for the Emperor to ambush them as soon as they enter. He is about to petrify Ida, Lilith, and King as Luce fights him over the door, with Luce even managing to break off a piece of his mask. In spite of the damage, Luce surrenders the door to him, only to fake him out and destroy it with a few well-placed glyphs. At the site of the petrification, Gus and Willow have convinced the people of Bonesborough to argue in favor of sparing Ida, and they manage to stop the process partway through. Once back at the Owl House, Lilith voluntarily takes on some of Ida's curse to spare her demise, but this leaves them both unable to cast magic. Luce promises to teach them what she knows of glyphs as Belos begins to reconstruct the door. There are a lot of callbacks to early episodes here, intentionally so, as they create parallels to how the characters have changed. In Witches Before Wizards, Luce was kidnapped by one of Ida's enemies in order to lure her into a trap, and here, Lilith does the same thing, with the same result, of Ida knowingly going into a bad situation to save a student. And like before, it's a situation at least partially motivated by Ida. At first, Luce was hoping for greater things out of life than the realities of magic, and Ida making fun of her for assuming there would be chosen ones is what made her seek out that danger. At the end of the season, it's the fact that Luce cares about Ida and wants to protect her from a curse that motivates the trouble Luce got herself into. The fact that the season begins and ends with them in the Conformatorium is no coincidence either. This time around, it's less about people not fitting in and being locked up for their own good, as is Belos' propaganda, and more about people being locked up to enforce the status quo. If others were really able to see how Ida lived her life as a wild witch, then perhaps they would start questioning whether she really was a threat to herself and others. This is even partially alluded to during her petrification scene, as the crowd starts demanding her freedom. Even though they've been told repeatedly that wild witches are a danger, they know enough about Idolin Clawthorn to understand she is nowhere near as bad as she's made out to be. In fact, her eccentricities are hardly different from the things that most of Bonesborough's citizens already see in themselves, as many people start pointing out the positive impact that she's had, not just through her actions, but her presence. Every person is weird in some way. There's no such thing as a normal person. So when the world has some openly weird people out there, those like Ida or Luce, then the little weird habits that everyone else has don't seem so out of place. Wild witches serve as a sort of load-bearing part of society that allows others to live more freely because they can consider themselves more normal than those around them, while still seeing these weird folks living happy, abnormal lives. Of course, we also start to see parts of Belos' plan in the manipulative ways in which he tries to accomplish his goals. He uses promises of curing Idolin's curse to convince Lilith to capture her sister for him, taking advantage of her guilt to manipulate her. In this same way, Luce is able to be manipulated by her own guilt, as her insisting on learning magic from Ida could have contributed to her curse getting worse faster, as casting is what causes the symptoms to accelerate. Her guilt over her involvement, as minimal as it was, is how she was captured. It's not as though guilt is a terrible emotion, though, as not feeling guilty over hurting someone would be far worse. In fact, it's the crowd demanding Ida's freedom that partially convinces Bellows to pretend like letting them escape was part of his plan all along. But he never really wanted Ida to join the Coven, he just wanted her for her access to the human realm's door. He was able to claim authority over the Boiling Isles by taming wild magic, but we've seen that wild magic is harmless, something that the protests over Edelin's petrification show that the rest of the world is starting to understand as well. Separate Tides. As the portal to the human realm is destroyed, Ida can no longer obtain items from the human realm to sell, so the Owl House has to take miscellaneous bounties to make the money to survive. But because Ida and Lilith have lost their magic and are slowly relearning it with glyphs, they cannot take on any tough bounties. As Luce blames herself for all of this, she decides to go out on a tougher journey, hunting down the Selkie Domus with a crew of sailors. After proving herself worthy of the others, they arrive at the site of the monster's hunting grounds, only for a masked thief to take advantage of the chaos to steal the reward from the ship. Luce pursues the thief, only to discover it was Ida in disguise, robbing one of the Emperor's ships as they have the most money. But they also attract the attention of the Golden Guard, Lilith's replacement as the head of the Emperor's Coven, who threatens King unless they slay the Selkie themselves. This is something that Luce is having second thoughts on after realizing that the monster is merely guarding its territory due to having a baby in the area. But when Ida joins her in the hunt, she's able to remind Luce that not everything going on is her fault, and to think more clearly. So Luce teaches Ida some light magic so they can cast a shadow on the wall to make it appear as though the monster was slain, and the Golden Guard leaves them alone. Back at the Owl House, Lilith wants to prove she is still useful by making a scrying potion to observe the Emperor's castle, but she can't get one of the ingredients, fire bee honey, without her magic. Eventually, she is forced to accept Hooty's help, not only succeeding in getting the honey, but accepting that she doesn't have to do everything alone. Luce is eager to take on dangerous responsibilities in this episode because she blames herself for everything that's happened to Ida and Lilith just far. Before Luce arrived, Ida had a comfortable life selling human goods, and then Luce destroyed the door she made her living through, as well as causing Ida to lose her magic in the attempt to save her last season. Lilith also feels a heavy sense of guilt, something she has been carrying with her for the entire show and just hiding. The fact that she's the one who cursed Ida all those years ago and has been also trying to cure her. But she's failed in this due to her unquestioning devotion to the Emperor Bellows, who never had any intention of helping out the Clawthorn family. And Ida herself feels guilty over hurting the others, the fact that Luce can never go home due to the fact that she had to sacrifice the portal back when fighting Bellows and is now stuck doing odd jobs in a realm that her body's not acclimated to. It's this last bit of guilt that really wakes Luce up to the fact that she isn't alone in all of this. During this episode, she tries to reject Ida's advice as well as the central theme of the show, us weirdos have to stick together, by claiming that sticking together is the reason they're in such a mess in the first place. But sticking together is why Ida was able to reunite with her sister on good terms. It's why they were able to meet and become friends in the first place. Lilith serves as a counterpoint to this idea, having been too independent to a fault, and slowly learning that working with others like Hooty can solve more problems than it causes. Escaping Expulsion. Amity assists her parents Odalia and Alador in presenting their latest, mass-produced Abomaton, but she messes up the unveiling when it threatens a picture of her friends. Realizing that Amity's friends are a distraction from her work with the family business, Odalia uses her influence to have Gus, Willow, and Luce expelled from Hexside. They try appealing to Principal Bump to be readmitted, but when this fails, Luce decides to appeal to Odalia directly. She agrees to reinstate the students on the condition that Luce take over Amity's role as test dummy, and she's nearly killed in the performance. Amity, realizing her friend is in danger, gathers the other two and, with the assistance of her twins, is able to break into the showcase to save her friend. Her mother confronts her during the fight, demanding that she stand down, but it's only after demanding that her friends be readmitted that Amity allows the Abomaton to seemingly win the battle. Odalia intends on keeping the students expelled anyway, but Alador points out that working with the others has made their daughter stronger. Then the Golden Guard enters and orders the Blights to continue building stronger abominations, but only for the Emperor himself. Back at the Owl House, Ida and Lilith are learning glyph magic, with Ida experimenting with combining glyphs as Lilith sticks to the fundamentals. When one of her experiments starts to threaten King, Lilith needs to step in to use what she's learned from Ida's experiments to combine glyphs and save the day. It's almost a bit on the nose about the way in which this episode builds on the existing glyph magic system in such a way as to connect to the show's themes. We see that each of the glyphs that Luce has learned and taught others is but a basic variation of the element, and that more complex magic can be created by combining these basic spells. In this same way, the different people who learn various schools are able to combine their efforts to create a far greater sort of magic as they take their differences and make something larger than the sum of its parts. Emperor Belos has created a system where witches are divided and treat one another with animosity over which school is superior, a system we've seen Lilith and Ida get caught up in as they grow to be hyper-competitive. It isn't until Lilith is forced out of the Emperor's Coven, and thus the Coven system in general, that she's quickly able to start adapting to life as a wild witch, not merely in being free to cast whatever magic she wants to, but in learning how to do this as well. The main plot of this episode mirrors events in Amity's past insofar as her parents threatening her into compliance by threatening her friends. Whereas before, Amity was quick to drop Willow from her life for not fitting into the ideal her parents had for her, here, she's given the same ultimatum, only to reject it after some time because she's now beginning to realize that the version of the future her parents want is not the same kind of future she does. All it took to realize this was seeing it from another perspective. When it was Amity on the stage, she went along with her parents because she didn't know any better. It wasn't until she saw Luce on the stage, both the picture of her at the beginning of the episode and the actual Luce near the end, that she realized what was going on and that she didn't like it. Echoes of the Past. King regales Lilith the tales of his youth as a king among demons, though when she scolds the others for putting ideas into his head, he insists they check out his home island to prove the stories. Upon arriving there, Lilith is curious about the age of the carvings nearby, and after they split up to investigate, Luce gets chased by some sort of monster. Ida arrives late and fights off this monster, revealing that it can't leave the ruins before being asked how she knew that. So Ida reveals the truth. She found King there ages ago and rescued him from that creature, taking him home where she offhandedly compared his behavior to that of a king, which is where he got both the name and the idea of a grand history. Broken-hearted due to realizing his whole life was a lie, King pouts for a moment before Luce promises to take him back to the ruins to continue investigating, where she uses an invisibility glyph she recently discovered to sneak by and make it to the top floor. Up here, they discover the remnants of an egg, and, using a bit of bone from the top of King's skull, he recalls his earliest childhood memories of being alone, save for the monster, who wasn't attacking the group, but trying to protect King. He then recalls something along the lines of the word son, declaring that he'll find his family one day with the aid of those closest to him. King is, or was, a comic relief character who provided a sense of dramatic irony by contrasting his physical appearance with his opinion of himself. He claims to be high and mighty with an epic backstory, only to be a cuddly creature with pettier ambitions of playground conquests rather than world domination. This is a dynamic that has persisted for long enough that the joke is now understood for him, so when it's revealed that his whole backstory is faked, now it becomes a real tragedy, as King starts to lose the one positive trait he used to define himself. For a character who's been treated like a joke thus far to be confirmed as a joke makes all the earlier gags at his expense less funny, because now everyone who treats him as cute and cuddly is completely right. He really has nothing else going for him. At least, based on his wants and desires from the first episode. Over the course of the show, King has developed as he's formed tighter-knit relationships with those around him. Sure, he might not be the ruler of demons he once was, but he's got new friends and allies in his life, and that might be better. And sure, we learn more about King later on that implies he does have some nearby ancestry of more significance, but for now that doesn't matter. He is king, and that's the best part about him. Keeping Up A-fear-ances. While seeking out more knowledge on the door to the human realm, the Owl House gets a visit from Gwendolyn, Ida and Lilith's mother. She offers a cure for Ida's curse, but Ida turns it down, claiming that her mother comes by about once a year with the cure and they've never worked. But Luce is eager to look for something to help Ida, and she follows Gwen to a cave where she meets Wartlop, a healer who sells cures. With a book Wartlop sold them, Luce and Gwen make a plan to cure Ida without her knowledge or consent with a series of tricks taught by the tome. But these tricks only succeed in stressing out Ida, and after she learns that her mother's trying to trick her into being cured, she transforms into the Owl Beast. Meanwhile, Lilith laments that her mother spends all her energy on Ida and not her, telling King that meeting family's not worth it, before her stress turns her into a Raven Beast. Two beastly sisters begin fighting around Bonesboro as Gwen rushes back to ask Wartlop for aid, only to discover the healer is just 3 gremlins in a coat, faking miracle cures with makeup. Realizing she's been conned, she takes the elixir she's stolen from the house to the fight scene, calming down the sisters by apologizing in time for Luce to stave off the curse a while longer. In the end, Gwendolyn offers Luce a bit of advice about another human who once entered the Boiling Isles, saying he left something of his at the library. Luce is excited for a hint on how to make it home, only to cut back to her house, where her mother Camilla is sitting on the couch with Luce. So many times throughout the show we've seen characters hurting one another due to feelings of guilt, or out of an attempt to make things right. Lilith and Ida's strained relationship from before comes from the fact that Lilith was desperate to cure Ida's curse through her connections to the Emperor. Luce's door home was destroyed because she wanted to protect Ida, and Ida's curse reached a dangerous peak because she was fighting for her loved ones. So it's not much of a surprise that Gwendolyn would end up doing even more of the same as she is introduced, falling for a con artist's words because the part of her that is looking out for her daughter's health is overriding the part of her that understands common sense. She sees that Ida is managing her curse with elixirs, but is not content with a good enough solution, seeking out something bizarre in an attempt for perfection. But this means ignoring the root cause of all her concerns, her daughter's happiness. Gwen stops listening to Ida and frequently goes off on long trips away from family in an attempt to cure her daughter's affliction. She winds up neglecting spending time with the person who very much would have wanted to spend more time with her. Gwendolyn cared more about if Ida was okay than she did about whether she was happy, and a mother has far more control over the latter than the former. Likewise, she spends so much time concerning over the problem child of Ida that the more well-behaved and successful of her kids is ignored, not out of hatred, but because she didn't think that Lilith really needed the extra parenting. Once again, she was more concerned with whether Lilith was okay than whether she was happy. Through the Looking Glass Ruins. On his way to the library to assist Luce in looking for information on the other human in the demon realm, Gus notices a group of students from Glandus with impressive magic, and he tries to hang out with them and Bartholomew to feel better about illusion magic being weak. They say they're looking for the Galder Stones, and they invite him along, with Gus borrowing a few glyphs from Luce to pretend he is a better witch than he is. The teens arrive at the Looking Glass Graveyard, where Gus has second thoughts on grave robbing before they're attacked by a monster, revealed by Gus as an illusion cast by the graveyard's keeper. The others then tie up the illusionists as they rob the graves of their stones, but Bartholomew unties Gus as he's tired of being pushed around by stronger people. Gus casts an illusion over the entire graveyard to make it look as though the teens' magic has stopped working, scaring them off and saving the stones from being robbed. Meanwhile, Luce and Amity enter the forbidden section of the library with Amity's staff card, where they search for the diary of Philip Whittabane, the last human to enter the Isles. Their response to the book being torn up by a mouse causes the head librarian Malphus to fire Amity, though Luce goes through an off-screen series of trials to get her position reinstated. When she returns with Amity's card, she finds that the girl has finally dyed her hair a different color than her family's green, before showing Luce that the mouse who ate the book can replay information it consumes, leaving her with a peck on the cheek. Gus has always been defined as wanting to impress other people, whether they're the members of the Human Appreciation Society or a group of teenagers with more useful magic, to even his own friends. He's characterized as being over the top in celebrations of their accomplishments and supportive to just before an obnoxious level, as though all of the actions he takes regarding this support are performative. To an extent they are, but this doesn't downplay the actual love that he feels for his friends and allies. Gus does like his friends, and he goes very far in proving this. But the fact that he has to prove it again and again as if he's not really trying to impress other people, but that he's trying to impress himself. It's not the glandest students he wanted to prove his abilities to, but Gus. But this is where the issue becomes complicated, because when a person lacks self-confidence to the point of being self-destructive in this way as Gus does, then no amount of praise from a second party can ever really make one feel like they're good enough. Gus can save the day and prove that illusion magic is a viable school to everyone around him, but as long as those insecurities still exist in his head, he's not satisfied. This is the issue with looking externally for internal validation. Other people are not you. Later episodes will give a deeper look into Gus's psyche, as for now, everything appears to be acceptable, but understanding this means that Gus is a short fuse away from breaking down yet again. Hunting Palismen. It's Palisman Adoption Day at Hexside due to the Palistrom wood used to carve Palismen being too rare to allow the students to make their own. Many of the students form an emotional bond with orphaned Palismen, except for Luce, who struggles to know what she wants out of being a witch. Emperor Belos has been showing increasingly devastating outbursts lately, requiring more of his medicine revealed to be made of ground-up Palismen. He sends the Golden Guard out to capture Palismen from Hexside staging ground, including Luce as she was returning a stray cardinal. Luce blasts the Golden Guard's staff away, leaving him unable to fight off a hand dragon who crashes their ship near Latissa. As they're recovering, Luce sees Kikamora controlling this dragon and talking about finishing the job. She wakes up the Golden Guard, actually a boy about her age, and they flee Kikamora while searching for a way to rescue all the Palismen. As they work, the Golden Guard, named Hunter, expresses a fascination with the wild magic Luce has been using to cast a sleep spell on this dragon, which encourages her to return Hunter's staff after learning that he's a bit like her, unable to cast regular magic. They knock down Kikamora's dragon, and Hunter plans to betray Luce by stealing the Palisman himself, but when Kikamora starts to wake up, Luce is able to flee and return the Palisman to Hexside. Once home, she laments that she still doesn't have a Palisman when Ida and King return, having stolen some wood for her student. Last season we had an episode revealing that Palismen were not just fancy staffs but sentient creatures, and this episode builds upon that idea in a necessary way. As were the revelations made here included in the first season, it would have felt more contrived. We know that Emperor Belos uses some sort of medicine on himself regularly, the details of which aren't revealed until now. And we know that Palismen are magical creatures, but now we finally get those two ideas, assumed separate in world building, to be connected. He sustains himself on their debts. Debts that would have been considered at worst property damage before. But what we also learn about his Palisman-consuming habit is the fact that Palismen themselves are creatures produced by wild magic, the very thing Belos is trying to eliminate in his Day of Unity. So the very moral we saw earlier that made Luce come across as kind and caring is how the audience is meant to know that he's a bad guy. This episode also introduces us to Hunter, also known as the Golden Guard, and the fact that he's feuding with other members of the Emperor's Coven. Not only does this teach us that the ruling class on the Boiling Isles are not quite as unified as we once may have thought, but additionally we learn this through a character we're meant to feel a bit of sympathy for. Sure, Hunter does try to betray Luce the moment he gets his staff back, but he doesn't go through with it for now. The fact that he is without magic like she is, and the fact that he's young just like she is, at least in appearance, is how we get a down-to-earth grounding for an exploration of another world, a small-scale version of the world-building technique now used to explore a whole group of characters. Ida's Requiem. Luce and King are preparing for the Grand Prix, a race with a prize of broadcasting a message to the entire Boiling Isles, and they intend to use this broadcast to have King contact his family. Ida's afraid of this, as it means that both Luce and King will soon be leaving her, but she catches a glimpse of Bat, Bards Against the Throne, freeing non-Coven associated witches from a raid, and joins in as one of the members is an old flame, Rain Whispers. Ida works with the members of Bat on a few more raids against the Royal Guards, largely as a distraction from the fact that King and Luce will leave her soon. During a raid where they're fighting against two of the Coven heads, Darius and Eberwolf, Rain and Ida combine their musical magic to create an anti-magic field by weaponizing Ida's curse to take out some of the Emperor's closest associates. But as this field is consuming the two of them, Rain notices a photo of Luce and King, and, realizing that Ida has a family, they call off the attack, getting captured by the Coven heads as Ida flees. She returns to the site of the Grand Prix, where she sees that Luce and King have gotten 5th place, though she decides to broadcast King's message on social media anyway, as King reveals what he wanted to tell Ida all along. He is legally changing his last name to Clawthorn to honor the woman who is like a mother to him. I've stated before, several times at that Ida is the type of person who strongly values her independence, and this is the episode where that ideology is really challenged for the first time. On one end of the timeline, we are introduced to Rain, a character who Ida is implied to have had some romantic history with. As she's introduced to them, Ida begins to remind herself of the times where she was more down-to-earth and attached to other people, allowing herself to be defined by relationships to others. The fact that they're not still together means that Ida did choose isolation over their company, though, making her decision into a tragic one. From the other end of the timeline, we've seen her attachment to King and Luce, a relationship she assumed would last forever, now nearing its final moments as Luce is actively searching for a way out of the demon realm, while King is planning to reconnect with his family. So much of the last several years of Ida's life have been dedicated to acceptance, accepting bad situations and then adapting to them. She assumed that she was fine with being alone, but now that she has had another taste of companionship, she doesn't know how to live without it. She assumed that she was okay with her curse, but now it's affecting other people, so she has to start thinking about it again. Her actions alongside Rain as they fought against the Coven leaders seem to be an acceptance of this curse, using the fact that it destroys bardic magic it comes into contact with to essentially perform a kamikaze attack on her enemies. But Rain is the one to point out that she cannot throw her life away so easily. She has a family now, so there's some sort of earthly attachment preventing her from leaving so soon. Even if King and Luce are going to be gone soon, that doesn't mean she needs to leave as well. Knock, knock, knocking on Hooty's door. Hooty has received a letter from Lilith, who now lives with Gwendolyn, about the struggles each member of the Owl House is facing, and he decides to do something about them. First, he aids King in discovering his origins by teaching him about the different types of demon. Though after eliminating all 3 of the potential choices, King starts to fret that he'll never have answers, only to accidentally produce a blast with his voice, discovering a new power. Hooty, assuming he failed, attempts to aid Ida in her attempts to get stronger by putting her to sleep. While she is asleep, her usual nightmares about the Owl Beast begin to occur, forcing her to relive several moments of her life where she hurt people close to her with her transformation. But after a while of this, she gives up on fighting the demon and accepts that it stuck with her, developing a new harpy form she has control over. Assuming he's failed again, Hooty then tries to aid Luce in getting her feelings for Amity sorted out, by kidnapping Amity and forcing her and Luce onto a tunnel of love he made. But in her embarrassment, Luce destroys the heart imagery, which causes Amity to think that she doesn't feel the same way. After seeing his 3rd failure, Hooty starts panicking and destroying things, so Ida, King, and Luce all have to work together to give the couple an improper confession, as it's better than nothing. In the end, Hooty realizes that he was inadvertently able to help all 4 of them, and he writes as such in a letter back to Lilith. But while sending it, a tall man who looks similar to King leaves a letter for him behind, which Hooty eats. Ida has spent her whole adult life running away from her curse, or rather being chased by it. Her isolation is due to the curse hurting those around her, but mainly it's about hurting herself, as every time a person close to her winds up injured as a result of something she cannot help, she's the one hurt the most, due to the self-imposed isolation she feels afterwards. But the events of last season and a half have taught Ida that, while hurting others is a tragedy, hurting herself is still a choice. She may not be able to control her actions, but she can still control her reactions, because it's her reactions that have been the worst of her condition. Ida assumes that because she's hurting other people, the best thing to do is to place the burden of preventing this harm onto herself. But those who are truly close to a person will happily share some of that burden if they're allowed to. Everything that Lilith and Gwen and Luce and so on have done for Ida, the Owl Lady, thus far, is done out of love. So Ida refusing to accept help is what's really causing this isolation, which makes her symptoms worse, which makes her more afraid to hurt people, which makes her more isolated. Weirdly, it's Hooty reversing the situation that finally gets her to realize what she's doing to other people. Ida has refused the help of others as she's afraid that her association will hurt them, and then Hooty tries to help her anyway, messes up by making things worse, and that's what finally gets Ida to realize how to solve her problems. She was so afraid of accepting help, when that was all it took after all these years, more so the idea of a person trying to help than what they actually did. King, too, finally gives up on figuring out what kind of demon he is when he learns that his powers aren't quite demonic, just a change in how he approached the problem. Eclipse Lake. Another memory from Philip Whittlebane appears from the mouse informing the Owl House that Titan's blood can be used to create portals to the human realm, and that some can be found at Eclipse Lake. As Luce is too sick to go, Ida, King, and Amity go in her stead to gather some, as Willow and Gus stay home to nurse Luce's illness. Once there, they discover that the Emperor's Coven, led by Kikamura, is already drilling for Titan's blood there, and they also catch Hunter nearby, who was searching for Titan's blood as he wanted to prove to Belos he is useful. They enter the cave with the underground lake, only to be caught by Kikamura, and to be tossed into a pit as Hunter runs off on his own. Amity, Ida, and King are trapped, with Ida failing to control her owl beast form until making a deal with it before flying them out. She fights Kikamura's forces as Amity catches up to Hunter, who's been warning her not to return empty-handed or Luce will be furious, only for them to find that the lake is dry and Hunter is digging his own grave. But when Amity offers him help, he notices the key she took from Luce for safekeeping and fights her for it, eventually taking the key by threatening Luce's life. Amity frets for a while before King cheers her up by reminding her that Luce would never be so petty as to dump her over something like that, and she was likely concerned for her safety. In spite of their failures, there's still some Titan's blood on Amity's glove from the fight, and Hunter starts walking back, having befriended the Palisman who's been following him for a few episodes. Hunter's motivation in this episode is something that comes from a fear that he isn't good enough for Emperor Belos, and so he tries to sabotage multiple attempts at gathering Titan blood so he can get the approval he wants. His motivation is so strong that it has started to spread to others too. His anxieties are partially reflected in Amity's motivations, as she wants to prove she is good enough for Luce by bringing back the material she needs for a portal home. People who have these toxic mentalities tend to spread their ideology to others by playing off of fear. In this instance, convincing Amity that a person she's known as kind and forgiving is not actually that way, and that she needs to work harder to impress Luce. This isn't a behavior that's out of nowhere, though, as Amity has spent essentially her entire life up to this point thinking the same way about her parents, as she fears that their love is conditional, because it is. People who crave acceptance always tend to assume they don't get it even when they do. The harder it is to get noticed, the harder they work to get noticed. The harder they're used to working, the less they value the things that come easily, which is a problem when things like acceptance are given out easily. Amity's trauma from her upbringing has made it difficult to accept when others genuinely care for her, as she believes that she either hasn't done enough to deserve that care, or that the person giving her the affection is only doing so to be manipulative. And then assuming that she is being manipulated is only a small part of the equation, as that's considered so normal that Amity would allow herself to be abused if it means being noticed. But this is only how Hunter thinks, and it's a behavior that Amity is unlearning, albeit slowly. Yesterday's Lie. With Philip Whittlebaine's instructions, Luce and the others are able to make a portal back to the human realm, though it doesn't work exactly as it should, taking her to an in-between realm that allows her to see through reflective surfaces. While there, she observes something that looks like her talking to her mother Camilla. When she speaks to it, it runs away to the house where Luce first entered the Owl House. This person reveals herself as V, an experimental basilisk from the Boiling Isles who escaped from the Emperor's experiments and found a home pretending to be Luce. She's been surviving off of magic that Ida left behind, though most of this is gone since the door is closed. So Luce and V search for a way to obtain more magic by visiting the Gravesfield Historical Society run by Jacob Hopkins, who's met Ida before. But as V and Luce are looking around, they discover he's been hunting demons and he captures V. She's prepared to stay behind so as not to inconvenience Camilla, but Luce wants to rescue her, contacting her mom and convincing her to head to the Historical Society. Camilla assumes it's some imaginative prank until seeing the captured basilisk, where she beats Jacob until they're safe. Realizing her daughter was telling the truth about the demon realm and so on, Camilla breaks down, asking her daughter why she ran away before Luce has to leave, as the portal is starting to fade. Luce ran away from home to explore a magical world of witches and magic, and that is something that's never really considered beyond the initial implications. Partially, this is due to the tone shift the later episodes have compared to the first few. At first, the whole being sent to camp thing is just something done to explain why Luce is unhappy with her life, as a means of justifying why she would want to stay on the Boiling Isles. It's just a means of setting up the premise of the show, which proceeded to be some lighthearted adventures in a fantasy setting. But now the story is less lighthearted, and eager to deeply explore aspects of its setting and characters. No longer is running away from home something that is done without considering it. We need to see what Luce was running away from, and the way this is done is by putting someone else into her position who would not understand. Because while the Boiling Isles are mystical and full of wonder, they have their downsides as well. Someone who has closely experienced these downsides does not consider their world as so great, and they would want something more peaceful, which is why V is eager to have a quiet life in the suburbs. Camilla isn't some monster experimenting on creatures, she's just a mother who wanted what was best for her daughter, not to be expelled. The Owl House has taken a tonal shift from a daydream-like fantasy series to something with more emotional weight, so character decisions are retroactively given more weight, forcing Luce to justify why she ran away from a home where she was loved. Follies at the Coven Day Parade. Luce is trying to record a video for her mother to prove that the demon realm isn't so bad, but she struggles to find proof that she made the right choice by staying. Meanwhile, the Coven Day Parade is about to occur, a showing of each of the covens, where the Emperor is set to make a big announcement. Ida is looking for a way to talk to Rain again, as Luce has overheard Kikimora talking to family she won't get to see, and gets an idea. Luce works with the rest of the Owl House to create a big distraction at the parade, so they can kidnap both Rain and Kikimora from their floats, allowing Kikimora to visit her family without getting in trouble, while Rain has a chance to catch up with Ida. Despite this plan going exactly as intended, Rain wants nothing to do with Ida, not even remembering their last meeting due to some plant-based tea Terra, the head of the plant coven, has been feeding them. Meanwhile, Terra is also searching for the kidnapped Kikimora, luring her out with promises of a promotion. When she's finally given the chance to leave, Kikimora rejects her family to get the promotion instead, only to learn that this promotion only meant she wouldn't be executed for treason. Amity has found Luce's phone, wanting to watch the video she recorded for her mother to learn how the visit to the human realm went, but also respecting Luce's privacy. In the end, the parade ends and the Emperor unmasks himself to a cheering crowd after announcing the Day of Unity and the end of wild magic. The first episode of the second half of Season 2 and the first episode made after the showrunners were informed there would be an abbreviated Season 3, a conversation that Dana Terrace was not involved in at all, only told of the result afterward. There was never any confirmation as to why the Owl House was softly ruined in this way, as none of the people involved with the show were ever given details of these meetings, leaving people to speculate over the phrase, "it didn't fit the Disney brand." Some argue this means the show was cancelled due to not being the episodic kid-friendly romp it was advertised as, which would be ironic given that cutting the final season down by so many episodes ensured any slice-of-life stories for the last half of the show are cut entirely. Others say it was because the cost of each episode was too high, in spite of the successes the show had, and, having one of the largest war chests of any streaming service in an industry where success is defined in terms of the customers you get from elsewhere, as much as the customers you retain, which ties into the Disney brand comment from before, where not fitting the brand means bringing in subscribers who would normally not have paid attention to the service. Regardless of why, the fact is that the Owl House had to expedite its story to better fit the limited run it would have, which results in a lot of stories not getting the full development they would have had. Some characterization is rewritten, other important revelations are rushed, so the overall plot makes sense even if character arcs don't. Elsewhere and Elsewhen. Lilith is given a new job as the curator of the Museum of Supernatural History, where one of her old acquaintances from her days in the Emperor's Coven returns a few of her old things, including a device needed to find time pools that allow people to go back in time. Luce and Lilith head out to discover these pools, winding up on a beach where, after a bit of trial and error, they manage to wind up in the Dead Warden era, where Philip Wittebane once lived. They find him in an early version of Bonesborough, which is far from the wild magical hellscape it was implied to be, and he recruits their help in searching for the Collector, who will help them get back to the human realm. Luce and Philip share their knowledge of glyph magic as he takes them inside the head of the Titan, supposedly hallowed ground, where they're stuck at a partially solved puzzle door. But Luce notices that Philip has already written in his diary about the two dying to the beast beyond the door, and he betrays them, leaving Luce and Lilith to be eaten as he retrieves a disc from underground. Remembering a lecture Lilith gave before on a boring historical fact, Luce is able to tame the beast, and they catch up to Philip, where Lilith punches him in the nose and leaves to do something really interesting, watching a man carve a baluster. Back at the Owl House, Ida has been trying to avoid a reunion with her father, but doesn't manage to escape a conversation, where he gives her a palistrom tree seed while talking about the work he's done with the Bat Queen to restore the forest, after Ida's owl beast form maimed him to be unable to carve Palismen as he used to. If it isn't obvious by the end of the episode, Belos and Philip are the same person. It even plays Belos' musical motif during the final scene of the episode, just after showing Philip consuming a Palisman, the way the Emperor has been doing this whole time. Other parallels are made to his character, a few of which won't make sense until the reveal is confirmed later on. For one, Philip was quickly able to identify that Luce and Lilith were witches, ironically, and manipulated them as soon as he met them. First by faking as though he was injured to get them to lower their guards, and next by lying about his motivations by claiming he wanted the same thing they did. Just as Philip had, Belos tries to convince people that he's on their side by making his ambitions appear as though they were far more universal than they are. That what is good for him has to be good for everybody. Lilith gets her first glimpse of the man who Belos really is in this episode, although technically she knew all she needed to as soon as the man said he would cure her sister. Lilith meets a character who is a fun explorer type, making her feel like she's a boring person because she has boring interests that others can't find the appeal in. But Luce was paying attention to her lessons all along, even going along with what she originally wanted towards the end of their trip. It goes to show there is no such thing as a boring hobby, just a boring person who can't find the fun in things. Whether that hobby is historical architecture, or drawing roadkill, or listening to a really long video essay. Any sport in a storm. Luce and Amity learn of a book signing at the local store by Mildred Featherwhile, the author of The Good Witch Azura, and they excitedly head out to learn her identity as they speculate on how her books could be found in both the human and demon realms. Willow has founded a flyer derby team, but the Abominations professor, still upset that she dropped his class, says he won't approve the club unless they win a game. Willow starts recruiting for her club, finding Hunter, who calls himself Caleb, as he's in the middle of recruiting for the Emperor's Coven. He joins the team in spite of his initial reservations about everybody's abilities, and quickly finds out they're good when they win against the professor's team. Hunter celebrates their win by forcing them to join the Emperor's Coven, which he believes will get him the approval of Darius, head of the Abominations Coven. But rather than pride, he feels shame, heading out to rescue the others and even stepping in front of an attack by Darius to protect them. Rather than being upset, Darius is happy to see that Hunter's finally standing up for himself, and he promises to keep Hunter's betrayal and his Palismen a secret. Meanwhile, Amity and Luce have tracked down the author after the book signing was shut down, learning that it was a conspiracy by Tibbles to try to sell copies of a book that washed ashore in the demon realm. That failed because only one other person actually bought the books, Amity. Luce and Amity spend this whole episode speculating on the mystery of how their favorite book series can appear in both the human realm and the demon realm, connecting this to the overall plot of Luce trying to find her way home, and then coming up with increasingly convoluted ways it might make sense. The reality is that it's a holdover from the original pilot, where Amity was a witch who visited the human realm for a year as an exchange student, and Luce followed her back through the portal. But in universe, it's just that some of the books washed ashore as so much of Ida's junk had in the last years. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one, even if Luce and Amity wanted it to be more. This is a relatable experience for anyone who's ever gotten really interested in a book or TV series to the point of wildly speculating on random details of the setting and plot, only for the next entry to come out to confirm that the crazy conspiracy you'd come up with was not the most obvious answer. Sometimes foreshadowing exists for a reason, and if the audience guesses a major plot twist down the line, it doesn't mean the series is any worse for being predictable, rather the opposite. To Hunter, or Caleb, the highest possible honor a person can achieve is to be recognized by Emperor Belos in some official capacity. He attempts to share this great honor with others by forcefully recruiting his flyer derby team into the Coven, as it's what he would have wanted, Belos' approval. But by this point, the whole team has moved beyond wanting other people's okay for their hobbies and interests to be legitimized. If they like it, that's all that matters. The Golden Guard has spent so much time trying to win over approval that he's never stopped to consider whether there is any more to life, if other people viewed it as an equal honor. He's never even stopped to consider if it's something that he wanted himself. Reaching out. Luce gets a notification about some sort of meeting with her mother that she silences in more ways than one, trying to find something to distract her from thinking about it, when Amity tells her about the Bonesboro Brawl, a fighting tournament she wants to enter because her father won it years ago. So Luce drops everything to assist her in this fight, only to realize that Amity doesn't really need much help, leaving her alone with her thoughts again. So Luce enters the tournament as well, though even this is not enough to keep her mind busy. Meanwhile, Ida's working on a truth potion to give to the Warden Wrath to learn more about the Emperor and reign, recruiting Edric to assist in making the potion because he has some beast-keeping experience. But Alador has sent an Abomaton to force Amity to go to Coven tryouts that year, something she is skipping for the tournament. And this abomination has caught up to her, with Luce accidentally setting off one of its alarms when it comes to pick her up. This notifies Alador, who arrives to stop the tournament, though when Edric gives his modified truth serum to Wrath, they have other things to focus on, like stopping him when he transformed into a monster. Alador at first tries to stop him alone, pushing away Amity when she tries to help, but she's eventually able to help anyway, holding down the Warden as Luce and Ida are able to cover the rampaging beast in snow to cool him off. In the end, Luce admits to Amity what she was running from, the anniversary of her father's death and a ritual she and her mother had made out of bringing him flowers. Amity and Luce grow a few flowers together as they wonder if they'll reach the human realm. Both Luce and Amity spend this episode running away from their pasts, and for different reasons. Luce is missing a significant day for her family due to her decision to stay in the demon realm, something that's compounding the guilt she feels from effectively abandoning her mother when she abandoned all her other responsibilities too. As Luce is constantly reminded of her past, she's seeking something else to do, as she believes that simply not thinking about the issue will make it pass. Amity's also running from her past. This time it's the fact that most of her life was spent not only doing what her parents told her to do, but dreaming of doing other things her parents also told her to do. She has spent so much time and effort trying to join the Emperor's Coven that she never stopped to think about if that was what she wanted. Her seeking out more power was her mother's dream, but not so much her father's, as is exemplified by his past as a tournament champion. At some point in the past, Alador was not an obsessive inventor dedicated to the family business. Amity was in part hoping to remind him of those days when he was more independent, but another part of her wanted to understand what he felt about the whole situation. Because if Alador was once a more independent guy and he willingly gave that up to do what his wife says, then there had to have been a good reason, something to justify the way that Amity had spent the first several years of her life. Alador can be considered a bad guy in the show, not so much an antagonist, but someone who mistreated his daughter. But he has before taken a very pragmatic approach to watching her grow stronger by recognizing that her friends are having a positive impact on her training. Here, she gives him first-hand experience that it's not merely her friends making her stronger, but her distance from him. That serves as a sort of a wake-up call. Them's the breaks, kid. To encourage Luce to take a break from her glyph studies, Ida tells her the story of how she and Rain first met. The old Hexside principal, Faust, was considering expelling her from the school and separating her from her sister unless she attended the IFWAT, Instructing Future Witches of Tomorrow, conference and won a blue ribbon on behalf of the school. He sends Vice Principal Bump with her with his job on the line, and they're greeted by an underwhelming and boring conference. As Ida is bored with the ongoing events, she decides to make her own fun by pulling pranks on the exhibits, eventually meeting Rain, who is the only other one interested in her hijinks. Tara, head of the Plant Coven, takes over the activities by changing the conference's name to Heck, helping enhance Coven know-how, and intensifying the activities there, culminating by splitting the kids into Wild Witches and Coven Witches, and having them fight in a hedge maze. Rain is placed into the Wild team while Ida's on the Coven side, rejecting an offer to work with some of her own teammates to take out Rain, the strongest of the enemy witches. She and Rain are about to have a final showdown, only to dance together instead to taunt Tara. She seems unimpressed at first, but comes around by saying that she'll put in a good word about how strong Ida was under Bump's tutelage. In the end, Rain is able to transfer to Heck's side to be closer to their new friend, as Ida finishes telling her story to a sleeping Luce. Back at the Emperor's castle, Rain is being drugged by Tara to lose their memories, only for Rain to use a technique they showed Ida to repress the effects of her tea, as they plot to stop the Day of Unity, which is a mass draining spell. Once again, we are shown a Coven head pursuing somebody who is breaking the established rules of the hierarchy, only to restrain themselves from punishing them to instead talk about how much they like the person for being independent. Darius did this to Hunter before, and here, Tara expresses her excitement for a wild witch, wild in the sense that she's independent, to stay at Heck's side where she can become more talented. It's as if there's a direct relationship between independence and talent. People who do what they're told rarely end up making history or accomplishing great things. All the best innovations in life are things no one else has tried. Although this might just be a result of the rules put in place, because repeatedly in the episode, to the point of being a running joke, is Principal Bump reminding Tara that she's breaking the law by attempting to grind students into mulch and so on, and it's hard to imagine that things would have turned out well had she been allowed to carry on this way. When the laws are written in such a way as to protect people without power from the people with power, then they're a force for good. But when the laws are written in such a way as to protect people in power from those without it, then the only way to do anything of note is by breaking them. Understanding this is how Ida and Rain have both come into positions of power and influence, even among a corrupt system, and it's remembering these ideals that will eventually aid them in resisting it. Hollow Mind. While searching for a merchant still willing to sell to Ida despite being a wild witch, Luce sees the Golden Guard and follows him, hoping to get more information on the Emperor. But they stumble into 3 hooded figures preparing a spell, activating a glyph that sends them into the Emperor's mind. His mind is a pristine hallway with 2 figures lurking its corridors, one older, one younger. The younger one leads them away from the monstrous older form, and they fall into the real mind of the Emperor, a forest a bit like Willow's. Here, Hunter and Luce use some of the Emperor's memories to hide from the being stalking them, learning that he used false flag tactics to convince people of the dangers of wild witches in order to first create the Coven system, though when the Coven brands were placed, the people marked collapsed. Luce also discovers that the Emperor is constructing a portal of his own, as Hunter finds out that the Emperor does not respect him, as he's talking to an entity known as the Collector. After leaving this memory, the child from before finishes setting up a trap with the glyphs, capturing and destroying the monster stalking the group, revealed to be the souls of the consumed Palismen that the child, a shape-shifted Bellows, has been consuming. He thanks the duo for helping him trap the Palismen before Hunter sees the corpses of all the past versions of himself. As this is going on, Ida works on creating a portal to get Luce back from Bellows' mind, getting a little bit of help from the hooded Coven heads from before as they give her some of the elixir needed. Luce and Hunter are saved, but Hunter panics as the Emperor knows he was in his mind and runs away. Emperor Bellows' mind is split into 2 layers, one where all of his great deeds are accomplished, and another where the deception he committed to perform these deeds is shown. It's interesting that the outer layer is even shown, as one would imagine that a person's mind would only have the truth according to that person, to show events how they perceived them. There's been an implication raised about the fact that Bellows is so caught up in his own lies that even he has started to believe them, to have told the same story again and again, to the point where the truth has ceased to matter. Bellows believes himself to be in the right and will ignore even the tangible evidence he has in the interest of pursuing a goal. But the fact that he even maintains these conflicting versions of events in his mind means that his ideology has less interest in right versus wrong than it does us versus them. What Hunter learns in this episode is that although he has spent his entire life in service of what Emperor Belos wants, he's not part of the us group like he thought he was. Belos only cares about Belos by this point, and even his closest associates are expendable, an inevitable result of a person who only values others in terms of what they offer him. When there's no genuine love between a leader and his subjects, they are all considered disposable. The moment you become a liability, you are out of the us group. So it's more accurate to say that Emperor Belos doesn't view the world as us versus them, but him against everyone else. Edge of the World. Luce tells Ida and Lilith of everything she knows about the Emperor, though Hooty is so excited to see Lilith that he retches up the letter to King he ate a few episodes ago. King reads this letter, that has instructions attached on how to reach a tribe of people just like him. Ida agrees to send Luce and King away when Lilith convinces her that this distant island will be a safe haven from the Emperor's guard, and they head out alongside the crew of the ship they hunted the Selkie Thomas in. They arrive at the portal that takes them to the other side of the world on a different Titan altogether, and this tribe introduces themselves as Titan Trappers. King is given a tour and allowed to get to know his people as Luce and Hooty meet with Bill, their leader. As Bill explains the history of the tribe and the terrors of the Titans, of which only one remains, Luce pieces together that the Titan they're hunting is King himself. King, meanwhile, is discovered to be the last Titan and brought over to perform a ceremony involving a shrine bearing the Collector's face, and she uses her invisibility to save him before he can be sacrificed. Luce explains what's going on to King, who doesn't take the news well that the tribe he thought he belonged to were actually trying to kill him, and they're forced to flee. They destroy the portal behind them using King's voice powers and return to the ship, where King finally meets his real family for the first time that he can recognize them as such. The episode ends showing the Owl House surrounded by the Emperor's guards. King has craved acceptance for so long that he's willing to look to a group of people who hunt his kind for glory to find this acceptance. Sure, he was unaware that this was the case, with the others assuming that he simply dressed as their enemy like he did, but there were a lot of questions that he allowed to go unanswered during his time there. The real internal conflict he has only comes up near the end, when King is being chased by an angry mob, not even questioning why they're mad or who they're mad at. King is far from the first character to look for love in the wrong places. The last season has given us plenty of glimpses into the minds of characters like Amity, willing to put up with the abuse from her parents, or Hunter, willing to do anything for the Emperor's acceptance, even though he can never earn this. So King finding a group of people who appear to be like him, only to learn that just because someone looks like you doesn't mean that they like you or even have your best interests in mind, is pretty par for the course thus far. He does have a family, but it's a found family. And while the narrative never really downplays how meaningful this sort of connection can be, it still allows King to mourn the loss of the what-ifs in his life. He learns he is the last of the Titans. This revelation creates a sense of irony in that his original family was under his feet all along, but also that the physical proximity to his family doesn't make him any closer. None of his questions about his past will ever be answered with anything but secondary evidence of who they were. King mourns not the loss of his family, but the loss of his ability to ever meet them. And while he's far from lonely, he'll never know what he's missing out on. Labyrinth Runners. When Gus sees Flapjack, Hunter's Palismen, he follows them to Hunter, who's been hiding out in Hexside, where it's safe from the Emperor's men. An assembly is called, where Adrian, head of the Illusionist Coven, is planning on giving temporary Coven sigils for protection during the Day of Unity. But Gus is able to see through this illusion, realizing that dozens of the Emperor's guards are disguised in the school and planning on giving out real sigils. The real Adrian is upset that his disguises were seen through, so he threatens to lock Gus out of his school. But Gus reacts violently by placing a mass illusion over everything. This illusion takes the people inside Hexside through various places from the last 2 seasons, though Adrian and his guards are repeatedly disguising themselves as other students, making everyone mistrusting of one another. Gus is unsure how he's maintaining the spell, getting separated from Hunter when he's captured and brought to the gym, where he undergoes an illusion-enhancing spell after Adrian realizes that Gus has visited the site of the Golderstones before, and he wants to draw the location out of his memories. Hunter, meanwhile, has been found by the rest of the school and healed, helping the others fight their way to where Gus's memories are at their strongest. He enters Gus's deepest memories, thoughts so intense that even Adrian is panicked, and opens up about how he feels, which causes Gus to calm down enough to dispel the illusion. Willow and Amity manage to defeat the abomaton the guards have been using by working together, in spite of Amity still assuming that her friend is frail. In the end, the students of Hexside ask their new friend Hunter about the truth of the Day of Unity. Willow and Amity spend this episode feuding without Amity even realizing there was an ongoing conflict, much in the same way that Amity was feuding with her father a few episodes back without Alador having any idea there was something amiss. Alador constantly pushed his daughter away during the fight against Wrath because he didn't think of her as strong enough to handle things on her own. Amity then downplayed Willow's successes as she still considers her friend to be half a witch, as she has always been, never acknowledging her growth and contributing what she does accomplish to dumb luck. This results in the two failing to work together, getting in one another's way as they fight over who gets to be in the front lines. And yet the audience never really treats Amity as though she is the bad guy of this conflict, because we have 2 seasons of context to understand where she's coming from. If a person spends long enough getting overlooked, then of course they're going to treat that behavior as normal. We finally see Gus for who he is in this episode, not only because we see the peak of his abilities in turning the whole school into a massive illusion, but because we get to see Gus for who he thinks he is. Gus has so little self-confidence that he considers himself to be a total waste of space, constantly believing he is stupid in spite of the evidence around him. Hunter talks to him about how a simple lie is easier to believe than a hard truth, and this applies to both characters. For Gus to say that he's a failure would be the easy way out. He can tell himself that his anxieties are justified. But anxiety is rarely based in reality, which is why it's hard to prove wrong, because it never needed to be proven right. O Titan, where art thou? King has a vision of the Collector before arriving back at the Boiling Isles, where the Owl House has been raided. Luce tracks down Ida and Lilith's hiding place and asks about their plan to take out Belos. But because Ida doesn't have a plan, she decides to keep it a secret from Luce, as she takes her out for one last normal day. Seeing King upset over losing his connection to a family, Luce decides to perform a heist of the confiscated goods kept by the Emperor's scouts so they can rescue Francois, King's stuffed rabbit. But as they're looking through the warehouse, Ida finds a way to contact Rain, and she offers to turn herself in exchange for King and Luce's safety. Luce overhears this conversation and gets upset that Ida would send her away, and while trying to run, they both end up captured. Meanwhile, King meets up with Steve, a scout who is close to Lilith, who has been having second thoughts about the Day of Unity, and they travel around Bonesboro while Lilith looks for the missing Titan because she wants to worship him. Luce and Ida are soon taken from their captivity to an underground meeting place alongside Darius, Rain, and several other former members of the Emperor's Coven who have all rejected his Day of Unity, and Ida offers Luce the chance to finally carve her own Palismen. The very first episode of The Owl House had a plot revolving around finding a lost item belonging to King, not because it had any real plot significance, but because it meant a lot to him personally. This episode, right before the show begins its finale, consists of one last normal adventure where they go back to the very beginning to do more of what they always do. But what's not the same from the first episode to the last is who the characters are. They've grown up enough that the dynamics between them is new, with Luce no longer being the fish out of water she used to be, even if Ida doesn't see it that way. She still wants to protect her protege, viewing her like more of an adopted daughter than a student. But like a daughter, she's grown up into a more independent woman who doesn't need her mother to babysit her anymore. But Ida insists on keeping Luce protected, all while the ironic twist occurs of Rain doing the very same thing to her. They don't want to see Ida hurt, so they do everything in their power to keep her out of the loop insofar as the ultimate plan goes. Ida turns herself in, hoping to spare her found family, and yet Rain also winds up throwing away a perfectly good solution by refusing to allow their loved one to see potential harm. King and Steve spend the whole episode soul-searching, trying to find some meaning to their life after their ultimate goal has been achieved. King wants to find his birth family, and he has. It just doesn't mean much when they're so long gone as to be unreachable. Steve wanted nothing more than to join the Emperor's Coven, only to get that, and then get so caught up in the new amount of work that he fails to realize what the Coven actually does, only that they do it in secret and exclusivity. The Owl House is a show about the failures that can be found in success, and these failures usually appear when you finally ask yourself, What's next? Clouds on the horizon. Coven's Against the Throne, or CAT, is planning on how to sabotage the Day of Unity. The way it works is by using the Coven heads as conduits to drain the magic out of everyone who has a sigil, and they plan on placing a sigil on Ida and having her replace Rain, so her owl curse will corrupt the spell, stopping the Emperor's plans. Ida leaves with the rest of the Coven heads to enact this plan while Luce heads out to rescue Amity after reading a concerning text about her being grounded. Amity and her siblings are under house arrest for trying to stop Odalia from cooperating with the Emperor as they're trying to tell her the truth of the Day of Unity. After meeting up with her security escort of Hunter, Willow, and Gus, they sneak into Blight Manor with the intention of notifying Alador of his wife's plans. But King found him first, talking to the guy about his family's business and convincing him to stand up to Odalia. Luce and the others are captured by Kikamura, who now has a giant Abomatron suit to power her ambitions, though Alador lowers the dome they're trapped inside of to finally stand up to his wife. He tells her about the Emperor's real plan, but she doesn't care because she already knows, putting the family's finances before her own life. In the ensuing fight, Kikamura captures Hunter and flies away, but as the rest are escaping, they notice Luce turn into Hunter, as the two swapped places with an illusion, meaning Luce is on her way back to the Conformatorium. King's Tide. The Day of Unity has arrived, with Ida taking her place among the Coven heads to sabotage the ceremony. But a last-minute change has placed Rain between two of the more loyal Coven heads, leaving Ida with no backup. Once her curse starts impacting the Day of Unity, Terra and Adrian replace her with the real Rain, who's been captured alongside Lilith. The spell begins and Emperor Belos vanishes, prepared to re-enter the human realm, breaking his promise to the Collector to free them from their prison as he prepares to leave alone. Kikamura enters with Luce, being scolded for messing up one last time before being told by Philip that he doesn't care about her at all. Luce attacks Philip, trying to stop the ceremony, but she's overpowered, making a last-minute offer to serve as Philip's guide to the human realm in the modern day in exchange for letting her friends go free. He agrees, but when he leans in to shake her hand, she places a sigil on his wrist, starting the draining spell to affect him as well. He transforms into his monstrous form as everyone topside collapses, with Luce managing to escape only because her friends came in time to fend off Philip. King gets told to hang back, where he discovers a depressed Kikamura, and she mentions that the only one who can stop the draining spell is the Collector, who King has been having dreams about. She shows him where he is, and King begins to speak to him, finding out about his collar's glyph actually being a ward from being seen, as the Collector offers to stop the spell in exchange for King using his powers to free them. King agrees and the Collector takes a tangible form, splattering Philip against the wall with a small drop ending on Hunter, before turning his attention to the others. But King distracts him with talks of playing The Owl House, a game that requires everyone to be alive, and he stops the draining spell, with Rain using the last of their strength to remove Ida's arm so the curse won't keep hurting her. The Collector begins gathering an Owl House for his game, causing the Boiling Isles to be torn apart, including the portal. The kids try to take cover inside the human realm, but Luce attempts to stay behind, sacrificing herself to hold the portal together. But King refuses to let her do this, pushing her and the others through the door as it shuts behind her. Amity spends the first part of this two-part finale trying to warn her parents about the real meaning behind the Day of Unity, hoping that cold logic and self-preservation will convince them to turn against the Emperor. This winds up not working on either one of the two, as Odalia reveals she knew it was an apocalyptic event from the start and didn't care. You cannot use logic to sway a person's mind if that person's mind was not made up by logic. Odalia only cares about her short-term profits, even if in the long run she's dead. Funnily enough, Alador was also not swayed by logic or the revelation that the Day of Unity was a mass draining spell, but the fact that Odalia threatened his children with taking over his position. He just wanted one day to spend with his family doing normal things and assumed that once all the work was over, he would have that day. He wound up turned off of the idea of the Day of Unity because his work would have been for nothing, more so than the actual mass casualty event it would have been. Like Odalia, Kikamura also tries to suck up to power until the very end, where she's told that she basically has zero worth to Philip in the grand scheme of things. His plans were always about himself, something that would have been obvious to anyone who saw the long line of discarded golden guards in his wake, and it's not until she's literally down in the dumps looking over all the other formerly very enthusiastic co-collaborators that she realizes the simple fact that dictators don't care about you. But Philip still has the rest of the world confused by using one of the most common tactics for authoritarians, claiming they're the victims and the victims are the aggressors. King Belos has dedicated his entire life to eradicating certain groups, using his past encounters with them as justification for this, despite the clear one-sidedness of the issue. He attempts to fake sympathy by pointing to his scars, but it's not the injury that creates sympathy, as two wrongs don't make a right. Justice is not about getting revenge on those who wronged you, it's about making it up to those who were wronged. Luce has finally created a Palisman of her own, revealed as an egg because she wants her future companion to choose their own shape, rather than creating an ideal and expecting her Palisman to conform to that ideal. Allowing it to choose its own form means that whatever companion she ends up with will have a far more fulfilled companion, as it will change to better adapt to its own happiness rather than someone else's. So much harm has been caused in the show by characters who are trying to sacrifice some part of themselves to make things better for another person, that more net harm winds up being done, as people don't get the chance to make their own mistakes or suffer from them because one person winds up more inconvenienced by trying to solve other people's problems. People need to have the self-determination to control their own lives for better and for worse. Whenever one person tries to control someone else, be it out of spite like Philip, or out of love as so many in the Owl House do, that person loses something intangible in the process. Thanks to them. Luce finally reunites with her mother in person, bringing along her friends as they try to adapt to the human realm. Over a montage, they make several attempts at rebuilding the portal, but never succeed until eventually they start giving up on the project to lead normal-ish lives, getting human makeovers, and learning Spanish as V serves as their human realm guide. Hunter and Gus have gotten really into a series that is totally not Star Trek, as Hunter starts getting into sewing too, as a way to pay back Camilla for all the help she's given in taking care of the teens. Willow serves as the group's photographer, recording their new adventures. Camilla starts to have nightmares about the pressure she put her child under to conform, as she thought she might have been acting up as a way to cope with her father's death, though it may have just been Luce taking after Camilla herself, as she thought many of her child's antics were cute. Amity, with the help of Flapjack, discovers a box beneath the house with a puzzle in it, thinking it might be a guide to something that can help with the door to the demon realm. They decide to use this to surprise Luce, who's been acting out at school and panicking over her failures to save anyone back in the demon realm, by decoding the message with the aid of one of V's friends, Masha, from the normal camp. Her help causes them to realize that they were holding a map that could direct them to some Titan's blood that could power their portal. They keep this a secret from Luce as they want to surprise her with the information as a means of cheering her up on Halloween, but Luce has her own surprise announcement planned for that date, as she wishes to declare she's staying in the human realm for good, due to messing things up for people such as when she went back in time and introduced Philip to the Collector. But on Halloween, while taking a haunted hayride, Masha tells them the history of Gravesfield, how two brothers visited it centuries ago and became witch hunters to fit in. But when the older brother Caleb met a witch named Evelyn, he fell in love and followed her to the demon realm, with Philip Wittebane following him never to be seen again. Hunter is unnerved by this story, telling Luce about the path to the Titan's blood they may have found and harshly ordering Flapjack to steal it. Hunter then runs off to the swamp, where he's hallucinated another vision of Belos in the wild, with Luce following him after she realizes that her glyph magic is beginning to work again, letting her track down the Titan's blood he's headed to. But when Luce meets up with him, she sees that Hunter has been possessed by Belos, fighting her over a hidden vial of Titan's blood buried in the cemetery. The rest of the crew arrives to see this fight, trying to snap Hunter out of his possession, though it's Flapjack that gets through to him after Belos mortally injures the Palismen. Hunter gets enough awareness back to jump into the water, trying to drown himself and the Emperor, though Camilla dives in and saves him, with Flapjack sacrificing himself to nurse him back to health. Belos takes the vial of blood and uses it to reopen the portal, as Camilla encourages Luce to go in and fight him off for good this time. With the third season being 3 miniature movies instead of 20 episodes, a lot of character moments had to be cut short, with a bunch of plot development crammed into montages and shortened beats. It's an affordance to make sure that the main plot is not rushed or abandoned, and storylines get wrapped up in a satisfying way, even if aspects of the characters are left up to interpretation, as that's the better thing to leave ambiguous, because fandoms love inventing their own stories and filling in the gaps on what happened when we weren't looking. In general, this first of 3 acts has little plot development until the very end, with most of the runtime being dedicated to those earlier mentioned character moments. Even though there's a slow start to the season to focus on characters, the overall smaller runtime means that we still don't get quite that much time spent with them compared to the more slice-of-life focused first season. So to keep the narrative flowing well, the parts of the characters we do focus on are things they all have in common, notably that they're all still hiding things about themselves from others. Hunter has learned he is a Grimwalker, specifically that he's a clone of Caleb Wittebane, the older brother of Bellows/Philip, and the reason that he came into the demon realm in the first place. His fear is that, should the others discover he is so closely related to the man responsible for them losing their connection to their families, they would reject him, or at the very least hold him at arm's length emotionally due to that implication. He fears the others will view him this way because that is how he views himself. It isn't until spending a bit more time with the others that he starts to accept that, although he's not proud of who he used to be, he can at least be proud of who he currently is. Camilla has also, to a lesser extent, hidden a lot about herself, like the Cosmic Frontier book she hid in the basement, revealing her past nerdy side no different than the personality of Luce she supposedly condemned to the reality check summer camp. Because that, too, was a lie. She thought her daughter's antics were charming and saw a lot of herself in Luce's behavior. Had she mentioned any of this to her daughter, maybe she wouldn't have run away in the first place. Sure, she never would have entered the demon realm, but she wouldn't have missed anything. Luce is hiding her history with Bellows, being the person to have taught glyphs to Philip long ago, as well as assisting and guiding him to the Collector, and starting the entire story off that way. She hides this fact from her friends, assuming they would blame her for their situation. Like so many times before, we've seen that characters often try to take on burdens alone to spare those closest to them, and yet real friends don't judge others so harshly for their actions, but the intentions behind them. As Hunter points out immediately after learning, if it wasn't Luce, it would have been someone else. On the more optimistic side of things, Luce's friends hide the existence of the Rebus from her, trying to solve the mystery themselves as a way to take some of the pressure off of a friend who's been struggling with a lot lately. This is a more optimistic telling in the sense that they're aware telling Luce there's a mystery that could get them home would make her want to be the one to solve it. By now, Luce's desire to put too much on her plate and handle things alone is known, so they do spare her the details, though this causes her not to take any of Hunter's paranoia quite so seriously, because she's unaware there's any Titan's blood in the human realm. For the future. Back at the Boiling Isles, the Collector begins their game, turning all the people he can find into puppets so he can play Owl House, a game consisting of reenacting Luce's adventures before she left for the human realm. King is spending his time with the Collector, trying to use Ida's curse as an excuse for why she can't become a puppet, with her and Lilith hiding out in secret as Odalia works as a servant, organizing the various puppet people the Collector has. The rest of the teens, plus Camilla, are back, seeing the remains of the original Owl House in ruins, and looking for someone else to take shelter from the bright, sparkly denizens the Collector has roaming the world. They come into Hexside, where most of the students are hiding out under the control of Basha and 2 new minions who rule over the school in a more literal sense than she had ruled before, though she's not especially competent at this as she diverts more energy to her personal guard than she does to making sure people are fed and taken care of, all at the behest of her new advisor. Luce and the rest go into the memory photo room as they want to have her remember the glyph Philip used to teleport directly inside of the Titan's skull, so they can be closer to King and the Collector once they saw the 2 playing before. While they're going through her memories, Willow sees one of her parents and begins to lose control of her emotions, running away as Gus asks Hunter about the fact that he's a Grimwalker, leaving to help Willow when that conversation turns awkward. But Bosha re-enters alongside her new assistant, who reveals herself as Kikamura, wanting revenge. They're all knocked out by a sleep spell, waking up underground in the detention chambers. Here, they get split up, with Matt and Amity being confronted by Boscha, who just wants things to go back to normal when she was in charge, only to be told off by Amity for being selfish by not accepting changes. Willow is losing control of her magic, capturing Hunter and Gus as she confesses that she is tired of holding her emotions in alongside her insecurities. But the others tell her that they love her regardless of her flaws, and she finally lets herself cry, controlling her plant magic once more as Hunter rescues them all with super speed, magic that was awoken after Flapjack's sacrifice. Luz and Camilla are together after Camilla was able to use amateur-ish glyph magic to attack Kikamura and give them an escape route, with Luz trying to convince her mother that she wants to stay in the human realm because she keeps messing things up in the demon realm. And her mother, in spite of her attempts to play up how much she likes the Boiling Isles, confesses that everyone makes mistakes and these don't make anyone lesser. Luz finally realizes what she wanted all along, to be understood, and her Palisman awakens to its true form, granting her a staff. Kikamura rises from the collapsing ruins, prepared to fight the rest, though she is made short work of by the combined fighting power of all the teens together, including Boscha, who now accepts the responsibilities of leadership to give them the cover they need to teleport inside the Titan's skull, where Luz is able to introduce her Palisman, Stringbean. Back inside the Collector's Palace, Emperor Belos has come looking for a body to possess, discovering the Puppet of Rain, who he takes over to get to the Collector. There he starts to whisper in the kid's ear, saying that there are people out there plotting to take him down and pointing to King, who's in the middle of planning a way to defeat him with Lilith and Ida. They've learned that Titans can counteract the magic of the Collector, which is why the Collector's Titan Trapper defeated them all those years ago. Hearing this, the Collector is convinced that King really is out to get him, but he doesn't hear the full truth. King actually sympathizes with him and wants to convince him to stop hurting everyone else. A lot of mistakes are made by the characters of this show. A lot of mistakes are made by people in real life. So many in fact that it's easy to consider missteps and accidental harm as an inevitability of life, where simply existing around other people means that at some point you'll hurt them and they'll hurt you. And while this is the case, the other side of the issue is far worse, where you cut yourself off so thoroughly you wind up totally alone, hurting those who wish they were close to you anyway. Hunter has spent his whole life serving the wrong person, dedicating himself to getting Belos' attention, though it's more accurate to say he was doing it for himself. It wasn't until meeting people who liked him in spite of his efforts, rather than because of them, he was at last accepted, and even then, he couldn't recognize this acceptance until he accepted himself first. Willow tries too hard to protect everybody, being far too stoic in an attempt not to get much attention to herself. She figures that if she can avoid being a burden, she must be an asset, and she thinks this way because she has spent so long weaker than everyone else and not fitting in because of that. It isn't until she lets herself be vulnerable around the others she finally sees they still love her even though she's not perfect. Then she's able to control her emotions, not by bottling them up, but letting them out in a healthy way. Luz has consistently made mistakes on the Boiling Isles, blaming herself for just about everything that's gone wrong, from Belos' rise to power to the Collector destroying everything. Her belief is that by cutting herself off from the Boiling Isles, she'll stop messing things up for people, but her mistakes go further back than that. Her own mother mentions how hurt she was when Luz left in the first place and decided not to return, and so there's an implication that hurting other people is an inevitability. But rather than this being a depressing fact, it's liberating. Her decisions aren't actually making anything worse. Camilla confesses that she made mistakes too, hiding her nerdy side from her daughter to make her daughter more normal and less like herself. Her mother also made mistakes, and by confessing these to Luz was able to understand that it's possible to mess up and still feel loved, as is evident from the feelings she still feels for her mom. At the end of it all, people are the sum of all the things they are, not just the things they wish they were. Luz isn't perfect, and her failures to be perfect as she wants to are what she focuses on, coming up short of her dreams. So many characters try to define themselves by how they wish they were, and they become self-conscious when they see others with an identity of their own that their friends accept, while they still struggle. But the way we perceive others includes their faults, so why not accept these faults in ourselves? Your identity isn't really something that you get to choose, but it's something you can still change. You can strive to be one thing, but you'll fail at that, and that's fine. The effort you put into this dream says a lot more about who you are than what the dream actually is. It's a bit like picking a direction to travel in. Choosing where to go doesn't mean you're there, but it's the start of heading there. And by the time you've arrived, you're probably already planning the next leg of your journey or the next chapter in your book. It's important to choose, though, because if you focus too much on where you currently are, others can start telling you where to go. Watching and dreaming. Luce is trapped in a nightmare where her friends all turn against her for her involvement in Belos' rise to power. King is trapped by knowledge that all his kind are dead. Ida is trapped by her family turning against her. But when the Nightmare Amity misquotes the good witch Azura, Luce realizes it's a dream and is able to use a light glyph to wake herself and the others up. The Collector is upset that they're no longer playing as his puppets, so they take the group out to play a series of violent games. But the others fight back, prompting the Collector to get upset that they're all friends with each other, but not friends with him. They tell their backstory, that the Collector was sent by a group known as the Archivists, and got along well with the Titans in the Demon Realm. But the Archivists began to collect the Titans except for one, who sealed away the Collector as revenge before hiding his egg from their eyes. Feeling sympathetic towards the Collector, Luce takes her memory photos out so she can tell her story, with the Collector, Ida, King, and Luce traveling around to the places where these memories happened to learn what it means to be friends. Rain is fighting off the possession of Belos, eventually able to resist his influence, though Belos has moved his sights towards an even larger host, the Titan itself, whose beating heart is still on top of his old throne. He takes over the Boiling Isles, literally, as Luce and the others see the skull light up with life, a creeping infection spreading out from the heart. But remembering the lessons that Luce has been teaching him, the Collector flies over to try to save the day by reaching out to Belos with a hand and some sympathy. Belos responds by attacking him, with Luce diving in the way and taking the attack for them. She begins to rot, saying her goodbyes to the others yet again before vanishing into a puff of light. She appears in the In-Between realm once more, about to die for real before she's rescued by the Titan, King's father. He explains that he showed her the mysteries behind glyph magic because she was so kind to his son, and then offers her one last burst of his magic to send her back in a Titan form. Camilla and the others are beginning to wake up as they figure out that light glyphs can undo the Collector's puppet curse, and they search for Luce only to realize their magic is gone. So Camilla starts writing down the glyphs she's learned so they can start on rescuing people from the archives. Luce comes back to life, fighting off the spreading corruption of Belos and reuniting with the others, as Ida reminds her magic comes from the heart, and they strike directly at the Titan's heart. They assist in saving Rain, and Luce is able to quote the good witch Azura before landing the final blow, with Philip appearing one last time to try to claim it wasn't his fault, before they stomp his remains into the ground. A series of reunions occur as everyone prepares to help fix the Boiling Isles after their destruction and the movement of the arm. People move past old grudges, and there are a few overdue introductions. The Collector says his goodbyes to King, who offers Francois and Luce finally returns to the human realm like she wanted to. But only temporarily so she can finish school and then apply to a wild magic college in the Boiling Isles where, on her first day of class, she's greeted by a belated quinceañera party, and a chance to give the visiting Collector a proper bye. I began this retrospective by stating that everybody who is normal in the same way, but that was only something said to illustrate a point. The truth is that everyone who's normal is lying about being normal. Truthfully, all the normal folks out there are weird people who are ashamed of themselves, spending more energy trying to be like everyone else than they spend trying to be good people. If more groups dedicated more energy to trying to be more accepting, then the people who wind up in that group would be able to dedicate more of their energy into being better versions of themselves. Having the freedom to be yourself means having the freedom to be your best self. If someone wants to rule, it's easier to do so if the people they rule over want to be ruled. But people don't naturally want this. They benefit from freedom. So a tyrant must take power not by seizing it violently, but by convincing people that freedom is too much trouble for what it's worth. And the only human emotion violent enough to work contradictory to this logic is fear. Tyrants love fear. They use fear of smaller groups to divide the larger ones. Trying to act like most people are scary and dangerous doesn't work. People look to their neighbors and realize all the fear-mongering is false. Ida was a wild witch, but she wasn't dangerous. So a tyrant has to first convince people of a danger that isn't there by exaggeration or misplaced blame, They have to keep outgroups ostracized enough that people can't experience the cognitive dissonance, and once we're shut off from one another, it becomes far easier to control the narrative. People who knew Ida knew she was friendly if a bit mischievous, but aren't we all? Once they stopped talking to her, though, they began to believe the Emperor's lies, as they no longer had the capacity to find out the truth for themselves. People avoid her because she's dangerous, and she has to be dangerous, because why else would they avoid her? The next part is where authoritarianism really starts taking hold. Convince people to give up their own rights by first convincing people to give up other people's rights. Once you can convince a majority of the population that certain privileges are conditional, that those outgroups don't deserve these rights, then every single person has lost their rights because they're now considered privileges. People are afraid of wild magic and thus willing to steal their own magical abilities because they prioritize safety over freedom, something only a terrified individual would do. So if there's one lesson to be taken from the Owl House, it's to be wary of anyone who puts effort into division. The good guys are always the ones who try to include more people, even when it doesn't make sense to. And the bad guys are always the ones gatekeeping normalcy and trying to exclude others. Outro. Hey, wait a minute. The guy making this video never even mentioned the obvious queer themes of the show. What is he, a hack or something? Well, to answer that question, it's called normalization, where you present something to audiences enough to the point that it stops being abnormal and starts being accepted without really questioning it. This changes the conversation to one not about whether it's okay to show on TV, and shifts it to, why did we justify not showing it in the first place? Instead of pleading a case for equality, you force the other guys to plead a case for bigotry. So, Willow having two dads I don't think ever got mentioned in this video until this sentence because it wasn't important. Luce and Amity being in a sapphic relationship isn't really remarked upon because it's not like having them be in love is any more than a sort of character development. The enemies to lovers thing works regardless of gender, so why make that a part of it? If anything, Luce and Amity's relationship is unusual because they actually had one. The show developed the relationship instead of dangling a will they, won't they over the audience's head until we're sick of the romantic tension. As someone whose whole thing is watching a bunch of cartoons, this is really the more shocking aspect of the ship. And Rain's got they-them pronouns, and it's not super noticeable either. Turns out there's plenty to their character beyond identity, as is the case for literally every other member of the main cast. Okay, for that last one, I probably messed up on saying it once or twice, so pretty sure I caught them all in the script. I know when I wrote it, though, I had to do a quick Control-Z here and there, but I think I was fine, but point that out if I didn't. Oh, also for the Collector, they alternate between they and he somewhat arbitrarily, fitting of his character, as you certainly get some otherworldly vibes from them, like he doesn't play by the same rules as the rest of us, so it comes across as valid. Hopefully the queer themes tying into the overall themes of opposing oppression and discovering identity were pretty obvious, but as the whole finding your identity so it cannot be manipulated by others theme of the show is universal, so I don't have to make one very specific analogy. Shows like this are great because everybody gets to find some means of relating to the characters, not just the queer folk watching it. Because The Owl House is a semi-biographical work in the same sense that every series made in history has been a semi-biographical work, which means that every member of the audience can likewise find it to be about them and their struggles and their experiences, because at the end of the day, everybody who is weird in the same way.